All right, good evening. Welcome. We are sorry for our delay. We had three executive sessions upstairs on three separate matters. So we're sorry to have kept you waiting, but we're glad to see you. The board meeting of the Board of Education for December 17, 2019 is called to order. For tonight's meeting, any item that will be voted on has been posted as required by state law. This meeting is being televised live on Channel 28 and will be replayed throughout the next 2 weeks. Please check the district website for replay times. This meeting is also being streamed live on our PPS TV services website. Welcome again. This is the last board meeting of 2019. Tonight we'll hear an update on the district's dyslexia plan as well as an action to approve an amendment to Roosevelt's Phase 4 Master Plan. We will also accept the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, also referred to as the CAFR. And we have a slight modification to our agenda. We will address the item regarding the CAFR immediately following our business agenda. At this time, the board will vote on its consent agenda. Ms. Bradshaw, are there any changes to the consent agenda?
There were no content changes, but the resolutions were reordered to put the complaint that went into executive session into the consent agenda. So you have a revised copy at your seat, and it has been posted. So there's no motion needed to accept it. Just wanted to make sure you knew.
So does that mean that there won't be any discussion about it?
There it is, 6017. Yes, this is on the consent agenda.
So I haven't, well,
Does anyone,
I would like it not to be on the consent.
you'd like to pull it
agenda.
from the consent agenda, 6017? Is that what you're referring to, the complaint, or?
Okay, I don't have yes.
Yes, okay.
I also have a couple things I want to say about items on the consent agenda. I also would like to, it's actually a business agenda versus a consent agenda. So I'd like the superintendent evaluation template to be a separate vote. And then I have just a comment I want to make about one of the contracts on the business agenda. And I'm sorry I didn't raise this earlier, but I didn't know it was some of these things were going to be wrapped into
All right.
what's described as a consent agenda.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you, then I'm looking for a motion to approve the business agenda minus 6015, the superintendent's evaluation template, and 6017, the complaint that we have just heard in executive session. Do I have a motion to move the business agenda as such?
So moved.
Second.
Director Bailey moves, Director Brim Edwards seconds. Is there any discussion on that business agenda?
Yes. So I am going to just submit a statement for the record on Resolution 6013. And then on Resolution 6010, there's a contract for the Gunter consultancy. This is a direct negotiation professional service contract that now has 6 amendments for a contract of a total of 2.3. And I just want to note the initial amendment that circulated didn't have the exhibits, but they, along with the consultants listed in the detailed cost, it's since been added. And the district has also added district staff and a summary of the work product, in addition to the special expertise that the Gunter Group consultants bring to this work. Longer term, a question related to contracts that I'd like to have with the Deputy Superintendent for Business and Operations and the board relates to the process of when we have contracts that have multiple amendments, how we pull through the relevant information from each of the amendments to the final one we vote on, because, for example, in this case, the 6th amendment, there was information in earlier amendments that unless we'd gone back and looked at each of the amendments, you wouldn't have seen. So just from a process standpoint, how do we have when we review something that's, it's not efficient nor good practice to continually do a new contract, but if we have amendments, how are we pulling those things through so that when we're voting on the Sixth Amendment, the essential information that we probably want to see is contained with the last amendment that's before us.
Are you talking about just the aggregate amount of the contracted work or about specific functions?
It's a variety of things. So given a contract like this, I think based on the memo we receive from staff, certainly provide very special expertise and have helped us on a whole host of projects over a period of time. And over the period of time, what has the nature of the services they've provided have changed. And so from the beginning contract, I think you had mentioned, for example, it pointed out that initially you actually had some people from the group staffing positions, and we've evolved from that with the build out of the finance and operations staff, and that the original contract still has that piece, and some of the changes were made over the course of almost 2 years when the amendments were made. So if you only looked at the beginning contract and then the Sixth Amendment, you'd miss some of those pieces. So this is more just of so that board members aren't going through the last 5 amendments in order to find out and find relevant information. And I will say that the purchasing and contracting team continues to be sort of a model partner in sharing information. It's just something that sort of came to light with this particular contract. And then the other issue on the contracts that I wanted to raise is because of the ACH fraudulent activity, we now are just posting a very brief mention, essentially the vendor name, a sentence description of what they provide publicly, and the overall dollar amount. And I think that it was wise for the district to change its practice until we have a better understanding of what happened, and then we have the ACH audit. But I think for especially some of these contracts that are over $1 million, that we probably should share more information than just the sentence. And I know that somebody, if they really want to see the contract, can request it. But that just seems like a step that most individuals aren't going to say. So in between now and the time in which we get recommendations on changes we should make based on the ACH audit, other things, I'm wondering if there's a medium point between sharing all the details of the contract and just one sentence.
I want to agree with that. I think we should be sharing more information, and we can do it in a way that doesn't release any confidential information or anything that endangers us.
I think I would just say that my understanding is the district's in the process of looking at what the risks are, and I would be very reluctant to share too much information until we have reached that point. And so I would actually say what we're sharing now, which is a minimum, I agree, would be sufficient until we get a recommendation back from staff that says this is what's appropriate to share that doesn't put us at risk. I don't think it's appropriate for us as a board to start asking for additional information until that risk assessment is complete.
All right, do we have any more discussion on the business agenda itself? Then we'll move on to the items that have been pulled. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on the consent agenda?
No, there was some public comment, but it was on one of the resolutions that have been pulled from it.
Okay, all right. Okay, the board will now vote on the consent agenda items 6010 through 6017 with the exception of 6017 and 6015. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
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 All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? The business agenda is approved by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Latterell voting.
Yes.
Thank you, Maxine. Okay, so we can move on to the two items that have been pulled. Let's start with 6017 discussion.
Do you want to move
Do you wanna do-
first?
Sure. So do I have a motion to bring forward for consideration 6017, which has been pulled from the consent agenda?
I move it.
Second. Director Brim
Sorry.
Edwards moves, Director Constam, myself, seconds. Is there any discussion on item 6017? All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Well, I'm sorry, are we voting on?
No, I'm sorry, never mind. I got a little ahead of myself. Discussion on item 6017.
I was like, I took a breath. And
We'll do it one at a time. Sorry.
Did you want to say something?
No.
Okay. So the complaint before the board raises a host of issues, I think, about the complaint process that really highlighted, I think, probably the need for the board to take another pass at the complaint process. So I know for four of us, we spent a fair amount of time when we first, in 2017, tackling this issue and getting the complaint process compliant with state law. And I think we vastly improved the complaint process. I think this complaint maybe highlights some additional work we need to do, and maybe it's not even changing the policy, but being more clear avenues that the avenues in which different complaints go through, and just from I think the community standpoint, that it will allow people to engage with the district in the place in which they're most likely to get their complaint responded. I had appreciated the opportunity, and I just want to, I guess, Liz, you'll tell me if I'm venturing somewhere I can't go. I just want to say I appreciate the visit to Vernon the other day to visit classrooms with the superintendent and the deputy superintendent, chance to talk to students, teachers, and the principals. I saw students intensely focused on their learning and a positive interaction between students and teachers in all the classrooms. It was a great visit. My concerns that I have that still, I'm going to support the superintendent's recommendation here, but some outstanding concerns I have with the process that, and this also I think goes to just us speaking in the same channels with parents and community members, that there was a discussion initially about Black student proficiency, and the district responded in terms of growth, and there has been a lot of growth that we could point to, but if you look at proficiency, it's been relatively flat despite there being individual student growth, which is important, but they were talking about something else and we were responding in a different way. So matching up and having those conversations, I think we talked about this when we discussed our goals, that we were focusing our goals on growth, and that required an additional conversation, because most parents and community members are focused on proficiency. Is my student at grade level? And growth is it's more complex, and it tells us a lot more about how we can help students. But it's somewhat of a different, it's a complementary conversation, but it's, for most parents, it's not in place of. So I just want to recognize that. Also, in our initial response, the district response talked about recommending action, and it wasn't clear if the recommended action was going to occur. And I can see how parents sometimes may be skeptical about whether the district is going to respond. So I hope we have sort of continued engagement on things that were recommended. If the district felt that's the right thing to do and we're recommending things, that we follow through. There also was, we did acknowledge in the response that there's underrepresentation of students of color in some school activities, including the Battle of the Books and Chess Club. And this would be another thing that as we move forward, just that we're reflective about participation reflecting the school community and really digging into, and I see the line of inquiry happening, but really digging into what are the barriers that we may not see to our activities both during the school day and after the school day. The participation reflects the diversity of the school community. And then the final point is the complainant was the target of a negative chant during a school performance at a school assembly. And I do think the district acknowledged that by asking that the lyrics be changed, that it didn't meet the district standards.
It wasn't lyrics, it was an outburst. It wasn't an organized activity.
Well, what was said at the assembly, that it was done in a school district forum, and I don't, personally, I'm sorry that happened at a school assembly. I think regardless, school events should not be used in a way by any party to convey disrespect or negativity to a parent, and I think it's really unfortunate that it happened, and that as a district we should be setting higher standards, and I understand it wasn't scripted or acknowledged or given approval by the district, but it still happened at a district forum, and I think we owe the complainant an apology. And then lastly, I want to acknowledge the various district staff people who have spent a fair amount of time at Vernon and with the Vernon community, both parents and students, not just the complainant, to look at ways in which we can continuously improve how we serve all of our students.
Thank you. Do we have any further discussion on item 6017, the complaint that we've just heard in executive session? I appreciate your comments, Director Brim-Edwards, and I think it's always the intent of our complaint process to not only address the specific concerns that families are bringing forward to us, but to really think deeply about what are they telling us about our school communities, about our system as a whole, and how can we address whatever the specific issues are in the broader context too. And we did have some discussion about that, and that's an area that we always want to work on, because it's a big effort to bring a complaint forward and to feel so strongly about issues in the school that you are asking for some specific redress for the school system. So we want to, it's incumbent upon us to be responsive. And I too had the opportunity to see Vernon this week, and a lot of joyful learning and really fun, engaging activities for students there. And I agree there's work to be done on bringing the school to the community even more together, but it was a joy to be there. All right, Resolution 6017 to uphold the superintendent's decision on a Step 3 appeal, complaint number 2019-06. All in favor to uphold that decision, please indicate by saying yes. Yes.
Yes.
All opposed, please say no. Any abstentions? All right, the superintendent's decision is upheld by a board vote of 7-0, and Max doesn't vote. Okay, thank you very much. The next item that has been pulled from the agenda is the adoption of the template for the superintendent's evaluation. This was an extensive discussion that we had at our last meeting, and landed on the evaluation instrument that we will use for the superintendent. We're a little bit late in what would be the ideal process there, because we have tied his evaluation process so closely to our own board goals, which we just passed in late October. So Director Brim-Edwards, you have pulled this item, so I'll leave it to you to bring forward.
Do we need to move it?
Yes, let's move it. What is it, Do I have a motion to bring forward item number 6015, the superintendent's
I move it.
evaluation?
Second.
All right, we have Director Lowry moves, Director Bailey
Do we have
seconds.
two people signed up to testify in this?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, discussion?
Do you want to have the people?
Do we
Speak
want to have
first.
public comment first? We have public comment on
Yes.
the, this item.
Yes, we do. We have Steve Buell and Renee Anderson.
I don't see Steve. Steve Bueller, Renee Anderson, are you here? I'm here. Welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So I am here, I thought it was, the first thing I'd like to do is read just a couple of sentences from the racial equity.
I think your mic. Yeah.
From the racial educational equity policy.
We have to
Oh.
introduce yourself.
I thought
State
you
your
did.
name.
Didn't you call me Renee?
For the record,
My name is Renee Anderson. I'm a retired educator.
welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, Mims Rouse, moral support.
Thank you. So, Portland Public Schools will significantly change its practices in order to achieve and maintain racial equity in education. Educational equity means raising the achievement of all students while narrowing the gaps between the lowest and the highest performing students. Now, my question for you, have we done that? Are we done? No, I didn't think so. So my concern is, at the last meeting, at your last board meeting, it seemed that the board doesn't think that we should be very detailed in evaluating our our superintendent, who is the director of equity. So we're the largest school district in the state of Oregon. We have many racial issues, and you just listed some today, in our school district, many. And we have this racial policy that really is just a piece of paper if we are not accountable to it. So we've had meetings with black educators, and about 40 plus educators came together, and we broke up into 4 groups. We talked about our top concerns in the school district, and in 3 of those groups, accountability was one of them, in each of those 3 groups. So out of 4 top concerns. And when we talk about being accountable, if we're not evaluating our director of the racial equity, of our racial equity program, then we're not being accountable. So we have these issues. We do not have a department, which, you know, I'm very concerned about that, because it's not like everything was great and we say, oh, let's just downsize. I'm not understanding how that happened, but our superintendent is our director and Danny is his advisor, and I just think that you should have a very detailed accountability in the evaluation, because what is measured gets done. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear. And let me see, let me make sure I didn't, because you know I didn't read my notes. I just talked off the cuff. So I just want to know how important equity is to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, do we have board discussion on this item?
Okay.
I have one thing I think I brought up at our last board meeting, that I did want to add stronger language to the leadership standard, the visionary leadership standard, and as the superintendent, I don't know that this is best practice, but the chief equity officer, no matter who that was, we would expect to see some language that we would have to evaluate against, progress against goals. I see that we did add, and I'm sorry I didn't bring this up earlier, we did add strategy 1.6 makes progress on PPS's racial equity and social justice strategy with a focus on the professional development strategies in the RESJ framework. And I know that this work is undergoing right now. We've heard about that in the last couple meetings. I'm just curious how we're gonna evaluate this making progress. It's not clear to me. What measures are we looking at evaluating on?
So I'll jump in, and I don't know if the superintendent wants to add anything to this, and I really appreciate Ms. Anderson's comments, and I actually feel, based on the last discussion and actually the multiple discussions we've had in meetings about this, that we have added a number of items to the evaluation to make sure we are holding the superintendent and the entire district accountable for achieving these results. First, I would point to the board goals that were adopted for the district, and one of those goals around third grade reading, the other around fifth grade math, and very specifically, on both of those, closing achievement gaps by accelerating growth for the underserved students of color, moving from 44% of underserved students of color meeting growth to 60% meeting or exceeding growth by 2022. Similarly, that's for third grade reading. Similarly, for fifth grade math, moving from 41% of underserved students of color meeting growth to 60% meeting or exceeding growth by 2022. So very clear expectations on the superintendent and the district that we want to see growth for all of our students, but with a particular focus on the students who have been failed by the district in the past. And then I think to your very specific question around what we added after the last meeting, making progress on PPS's racial equity and social justice strategy. So there is an adopted strategy. Ms. Ledesma sort of provided the board with some materials around that as well. I think coming out of the superintendent's self-evaluation that he'll be doing this spring, what I will expect to see, and obviously other board members can weigh in, will be a status update on those specific items in that racial equity and social justice strategy, where we've made progress, where we failed to make progress, where we need to focus more resources. And then I think that'll hopefully inform next year's evaluation template as well, if we want to get more specific based on that in terms of specific areas.
Okay, so there's two pieces to the evaluation, though. One is the kind of the leadership standard, and the other is are the performance goals. And the performance goals definitely have numerical targets, which are great, and they're going to show growth over time. But I feel like we're missing an opportunity if we don't include some language that's quantifiable. And I'm not saying it has to be this, but focused on a numerical target that we can measure against, such as no net loss of administrators of color, such as have we hired teachers of color? What's that number baseline to year end? Or some such other numerical target.
And I'm not comfortable with adding that in at this point. I think that might be as we look at what occurs in the next year, because I think again we're in December. We are asking Guadalupe to do this evaluation in the spring, to have those specific goals. I think I think what we need to do is look at this in May and June, and then if we want to add those things in, add them in over the summer, so that when we start the school year, we can give him really specific targets like that. I think those are good things to keep in mind, but I would not support adding those at this time.
And I understand there's a very short runway just because of our timeline, but I would just personally like to see a more targeted approach, as would occur in every in anybody's. I looked at other evaluations for different chief equity officers, and there's very specific, clear language. I agree about the timeline. I think it's really too soon, but it's something that I'd like to move towards because, for one thing, it signals to the community that we actually care about it enough to evaluate it.
Yeah, I think it would be definitely something to look at, including next year, and I would be supportive of that conversation.
And I think this conversation is probably very instructive to the superintendent when he responds in his self-evaluation on what does progress look like in that category that we're discussing now. So I think you can see an appetite for a lot of detail on that.
Right, and similarly, the resource management goal includes human resources systems, and that's one piece in particular around hiring and retention that we should expect to see something in the evaluation in May.
So just a question relating to that. So in 7.2, because I'm wondering if actually at the end of the year, are we, based on this, going to be asking the question that I think would answer what Michelle asked, which is, how did we do in terms of the recruitment, selection, induction, compensation, and separation with attention to issues of equity and diversity? Would we be getting a, here's the snapshot at the beginning of the year and here's the end of the year? Which seems like it would, there's not a goal, but we'd be getting data. So I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if that's the data point we're getting this year. It's a question.
I guess the way I approach it in evaluation is that first we have the data that establishes kind of a baseline, and then you insert some thing and you evaluate against that, and that thing would be the racial equity policy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think what we can expect this year is see where were we last year, where are we at in May, without a specific numeric evaluation this year, but perhaps looking at that in future years.
And I think,
So-
Julia, that's a good call out, that specific item which applies appropriate policies, criteria, and processes for the recruitment, blah, 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 because that's exactly where we want to be. We want to hear from the superintendent about the processes the strategies that he's putting in place to address the goals that he knows we have, rather than being prescriptive from the dais.
And we have not established a numerical goal for recruitment and retention of a more diverse staff across the board. That doesn't mean that the superintendent can't provide that kind of data. And I would hope that this self-evaluation would include some sort of some indication of kind of where we were, where we are, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. But it's, I mean, I agree with Director Lowry. I think at this point, it's probably not reasonable to add another quantifiable metric to the evaluation. I think we should sort of put a pin in it for next year. And I would hope, I feel like I'm echoing, I would hope that next year, having established a new template and having some baseline info under our belt, that we'll be able to produce an evaluation template including goals and metrics much earlier. So I would hope that, come June or July, we'll be able to come up with a set of expectations and goals so that the superintendent, for the very first time in his tenure, in fact, will start the school year knowing where we want him to end up.
Imagine that.
Yeah, thank
Imagine
you,
that.
thank you, and thank you, Director Scott, for putting this together and your work putting in, and your comments, everyone. And I'm from a big family, so I need to get the last word. I'm suggesting that we need to measure what we care about. we need to understand where we are so we know in a year or 2 years from now that we've made progress or not.
And I know that our RESJ committee is working on discrete goals around these very issues, and that they'll have sort of some goals for the district around teacher retention and other areas that will be our district focus. And I think the timeline is like in the next 2 or 3 months. So once that is in place from the Racial Equity Social Justice Committee, I think then that makes it really easy for us to hold our chief equity officer to those goals that our RESJ committee sets out. So I think we're all on the same page around
think
getting
we
there.
are.
We're not quite there yet.
I would support putting in something now, I would support,
Is there a proposal?
do you want to propose some language?
Well, I also agree that, it's, let's say January, and I don't feel like we have enough time. I mean, we want to see success here. I feel better about setting it up to be successful next year because we have the input from the racial, social, what is it?
Racial Equity Social Justice, RESJ.
Racial Equity Social Justice Committee, and I'd like to be thoughtful about this. I also want to say that it's important to me and to all of us really that we get it right. So I'm not in favor of, rushing to put something in just to put something in. I'd rather have a considered approach where we know that we want to measure it. We need to understand where we are so we know that next year or the year after we'll be able to measure the progress that we've made over time.
So there was language added between last meeting and this meeting, and maybe Director Scott, you could, 'cause I don't think the community has it redlined, point out what was added on equity?
Yeah, it was 1.6 was added on equity. Based on the conversation we had 2 weeks ago, the board wanted to see that language.
Makes progress on PPS's racial equity and social justice strategy with a focus on the professional development strategies in the RESJ framework.
And my question again is, how are we going to know if we're successful on that or not?
Because
So-
I'm looking at the framework right now, I want to clear. So we're linking that one. So the new language is connected to this framework that the senior equity advisor shared with all of us, that is a professional development framework that has stages for organizational change. It has some implementation strategies, system integration, problems of practice. So just so I understand what, by putting that in there, what this means, does this mean that the accomplishing it is that all staff have gone through it, or I'm just trying to,
So I think-
how are we going to measure whether,
I think accomplishing it, as I said a few minutes ago, the goal is making progress on PPS's racial equity and social justice strategy with a focus on the professional development strategies. The superintendent will provide his update as part of his self-evaluation in terms of the progress that has been made on the racial equity and social justice strategies and the professional development framework. We as a board will evaluate that progress as we do his evaluation.
And and we have a rubric of what accomplished looks like, so.
And I guess I'm just
I'm trying to understand so that we don't, what I don't want to have is like at the end of the year asking for something that wasn't what it was. So I'm just trying to get clear on what it is. So when you say the racial equity strategies, are you talking about the plan that we had presented to us a month ago, or the to be developed strategies? I'm not being argumentative, I'm just trying to figure out what it is that because
There are
I
a
don't want to
number of-
be unfair to the superintendent.
Superintendent Guerrero, do you feel clarity on this particular point?
I'm happy to share my initial thought on the discussion that I'm listening to. First of all, I just want to appreciate the board for quite some extensive work to land on some performance goals. I think it is the right direction to actually be concrete about the positive trajectory we want to see for student outcomes in PPS, and primarily starting off every one of those goals by highlighting the acceleration you expect to see for students of color. Every one of the performance goals starts that way, that our task is to narrow the gap. especially for our students of color. And I would include in that other student groups, but with a particular emphasis on those that have been historically underserved, which we would be the first to acknowledge we have a lot of work to do in. In regards to how this proposed template ties to an equity-centered approach, whether it's instructional or human capital related. I guess I would say, as one of 8 district superintendents of color out of 198 in the state of Oregon who frequently has these conversations with my 7 peers, as someone who has attempted to model a representation that closer approximates the demographic of the students that we serve by ensuring that 50% of cabinet level positions are people of color leading Portland Public Schools. My hope is that over time, at every level of the organization, that we have a diversity that reflects our students. The challenge with that is that's going to require a broader collective effort to ensure we have the pathways and the pipelines that will create the candidate pools that we want to see so that we can install folks in various roles in the school system. So have remained very active with our College of Ed deans, imagining what further pathways we can strengthen. We know there's going to be and continues to be a very urgent talent need, not just in Portland, but across the state. It's a concern that's shared by system leaders. I know that our chief of HR loses a lot of sleep thinking about this. We have a spring hiring season coming up. We know that the yield of graduates into the teaching profession doesn't begin to approximate the level of need that we have in the region, particularly in specialized areas, and particularly when you look at who is enrolled in teacher education programs that we actually have to select from that doesn't look like the student population that we need to better serve. So there's certainly work that we need to do from a talent perspective. You hear frequently here on Tuesday evenings about our work from an instructional point of view in our continued work at making our curriculum and our instructional pedagogies more culturally responsive, more attuned to the diverse learners that we serve. That is ongoing work. And you just heard recently from our senior advisor on racial equity share with you an emerging framework and some goals in many of these areas that we're not doing unilaterally. We have a 100-person cross-section of stakeholders, educators, and meeting in a racial equity advisory team, beginning to have these conversations around what are some of the systemic interventions, the school level and student supports that we should begin to really strengthen and invest in. And I'm looking forward to those emerging recommendations as we come up on our budget development season, so that the proposal we bring forward to you not only ensures the Student Success Act that has said those resources are specifically intended for underserved students of color, but that we also marshal the broader general fund to institutionalize strategies that are going to improve both opportunities and outcomes for our students of color. We have HR baseline data, which we'd be happy to share with all of you. My hope is that at a minimum, we do better than the diversity index that we currently have here in the Portland Public Schools. And that's going to take some really strategic work to make sure that we're doing that. I would also say to the discussion around accountability. I'm glad that we have performance goals that are tied to specific metrics. This is why at the start of my tenure here, my team felt it was very important that we begin to institutionalize a few phases of work that actually provide us actionable information, starting with some interim assessments so that we can actually gauge student learning and inform instruction any professional development we invest in and work with our school leaders. You now have, for the first time, almost half of administered student results coming to us as we continue to roll out those assessments. They're providing us with valuable data we didn't have before across many more schools and many more grade levels, and that work will continue to roll out. So starting with student performance data to initiate conversations about how to continuously improve was the first step. The second step the board saw is that it was important for us to transparently gather perception data about our school communities, cultures, and climates. We issued those surveys to our students, our staffs, our families, and other stakeholders. We had 25,000 people respond. It's a pretty broad sample set. You saw the results of that. We didn't, just like with the student assessments, pursue a prescriptive, punitive approach to those. What we said to our school communities is take a close look at those results, and we encourage you to have a specific dialogue and a continued conversation in your school communities about how do we continue to improve on the perception that our students and our families have about our schools. When we see ratings that indicate that our students want to feel a stronger sense of belonging, that's an important point that we need to think about, both at the school level and organizationally. How do we support our schools establishing those conditions? So those perception surveys was a second phase. A third phase that I'll preview with you now, since it's relevant to this conversation, is I also think we have to model performance management at the system leadership level. And so something that we're looking to institute are key performance indicators. And that is, what I mean by that is making sure that we as a central office administration are serving our school communities in effective ways. And so how are we doing with our facilities response, our transportation delivery rates, professional development offerings across every department? It will be very important to hear from our over 80 school communities how we're serving and supporting them. And to be really transparent about those departmental performance surveys so that we ourselves can model that continuous improvement and set some goals for our own central office departments about more effectively being responsive to our schools. So that will be a third body of data that we'll be sharing with the board, and that's going to take some work to have that be a substantive and an informative process. The combination of those things combined with our state accountability data, certainly our summative data, provide us with a pretty broad array of being able to identify where our strengths are and certainly where we have a lot more work left to do, and helps us to focus our energy, our time, and our resources in specific ways. Where I lose sleep is that we have a couple dozen state designated schools. And so by all accounts there, the measures indicate that our students aren't yet being provided the opportunity that they should be afforded. And typically they are of a darker complexion, much like your superintendent. And so this is going to be our opportunity this springtime to really communicate to the broader community that every one of our students deserves to have that quality educational opportunity. And so you can expect to see a recommendation that really prioritizes in a way that we haven't ever been able to do in the school system. We've made some early moves in the way that we equitably staff some of these schools, in the way that our principal supervisors, without too many more resources, dedicate the vast majority of their time in these schools, if nothing else, to offer sweat equity and guidance to the challenging work in front of them. I know that as part of our racial equity work, we know that to accomplish some of the success that we hope to have over time, that we can't do this by ourselves. And so partnering with some valued community partners is going to be a part of that equation. I don't think that we've kind of kept that level of investment pretty level over time. And we know that there are some pretty specific ways that they can help add to the collective effort of making sure that some of these gap areas where maybe the the cultural responsiveness, or maybe some of the educational opportunities, or maybe some of the adults that they see within their school community better reflect the community. What better way to do that than to increase and expand and enhance our partnerships with those community-based organizations? So that'll likely be another event. We also know for our students that are further behind, they need more instructional time. They need greater enrichment opportunities. And so we're going to see how far the dollars go. We are really thinking about how we create those extended learning opportunities, including a fifth quarter in our Title I or CSI schools. So I'm just going to plant a flag on that one. But 20 more school days, that doesn't look like the other 170, I think could be an engaging strategy to help provide some of that additional intervention and acceleration that our students deserve. So just to give you a little bit of a preview of some of the narrative that you can expect at mid-year when we get our progress measures and our interim assessments are turned in at the end of January. We'll synthesize those and let you know how we've done in our progress measures, and certainly we have high hopes to, at a minimum, do better than we did last year on our summatives. But what I'm most excited about is having a plan that permits us to go much fuller throttle so that we can really start making that curve make a steep climb. And that's going to require partnership with everybody. It's going to require continued accountability. I'm not shy about insisting that I do be held accountable and making sure that you have all the data that you need to measure that across the work that we do as a school system. So that's my initial thought. Thank you for the work on this template. It is a combination of demonstrated leadership standards and hard performance goals. And I think all of them across all areas are reasonable stretch challenges, which my team and I take very seriously. So thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. So at this point, I'll just sort of remind everyone in the audience. So we've been discussing the evaluation template for months. We've spent many, many, many hours both discussing the goals of the template, et cetera. Last meeting, 2 weeks ago, we discussed changes people wanted to see, which we put on the table. And then the goal was to come back at this meeting and adopt this on consent. It's been pulled off consent. So I think at this point, if there are any substantive, very specific changes to the template, I think we should entertain those. But I think we should move quickly to a vote, because I also want to point out we're an hour behind schedule. We have a number of people waiting to testify.
And my understanding was our agreement was last month, we were going to add some language around equity. And that was sort of and then we were going to talk about what the superintendent just said, which is that sort of tying through the departments about how we improve.
Right. So we made the changes, and I think we're ready to move forward. But if there are specific amendments.
Okay, I'm not going to offer amendment. I just will make a final comment. Well, maybe the other thing to do is what other changes specifically were made. Just
I think it's just that 1.6 and
What was,
Yeah, I mean, the Director
okay,
remembers
just-
the board received the changes.
I know, but we also are a public body. That's fine.
Sure. I'm happy to go back through those. We discussed them last time at length.
Okay. We went from one document to another. I'm just saying, I can pull out what they are, but we don't have to go through them. That's fine.
We have gone through them multiple times.
I was just asking what changed between the last document and this document, but I'll just make my comments. So I want to.
Can I just, so my understanding is that the only change between this document and the previous, the last version of this was the addition of 1.6, which we've already talked about. Is that correct?
There were three things that the board asked for in the last meeting.
The weighting, and then also there's
Yeah,
feedback.
Sorry,
I didn't mean to make it difficult. It just seemed like, okay, here's what we discussed last time. Here's what the changes were. It's okay. I can summarize them. That we did double weighting on the student performance goals versus single weighting on the standards. Mm-hmm. And then there also was a sentence added that the superintendent would directly gather feedback on his performance. Mm-hmm. Is correct?
yes.
Okay. So sorry, I wasn't meaning to be argumentative.
No, we were supposed to adopt it on consent. That's why I just didn't bring sort of all that material. But please,
Okay.
if you have changes, let's talk
I don't have
about it.
changes, I'm just going to make a statement. So, because I've gone back and forth about the template, and I think I appreciate the opportunity last week to raise a number of issues last time. So I'm going to submit a statement for the record, but, and I am going to support the evaluation tool. I would suggest that the board ask for the FIT assessment, which provides a snapshot of the perception of school staff or central office supports and leadership. I just think it would be useful. And also, I just want to highlight, I think it's difficult for us to, we're going to run into us having, and maybe it's okay, having very different assessments on some of these things because we're not directly getting structured feedback, like the communications and community relationships, without a form of structured feedback directly to the board. I think we'll all rely on our individual relationships within the community. Like I know if making an assessment around the superintendent's just leadership around curriculum development, I'm certainly not qualified to make that assessment, so I will probably go to places that I'm comfortable asking that question, and same thing with the communications and community relations. And I think there's a very positive way to get more structured feedback directly to the board, but I acknowledge that that's not how we're going to do it. So I'm just slightly uncomfortable with that. But I'm going to support the tool, and I realize once we adopt it, it is the tool.
Any
I
other
just
comments?
want to clarify, Chair, is that a different set of criteria or evidence that you would be expecting?
No, no.
I think, well, what it means is, so we
So
get
if-
to
I think
the
if
curriculum
we're not
leadership
making a
is.
change to the evaluation template, we need to go ahead and
That's
approve
fine.
this.
I'm just-
Yeah. So I think there's a motion on the table. Chair Consam, I would ask that we move to a vote.
There is a motion on the table for item 6015 to adopt the superintendent's goals for 2019-2020. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? Seeing none, the motion passes by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Latterell voting.
Yes.
All right, and I just want to say thank you. This has been a really long and thoughtful process. Maxine, you were in it. You were a big part of helping to come up with some of these metrics.
Maxine, just make it a thumbs up or down. All good.
And I also want to say that
I
this
believe our
is kind
student
of
rep was ready to vote some time ago.
this.
Are your DSC meetings like this, Maxine?
No, they're a lot more productive and fun.
As
Tell
my
the
sons
truth.
would say, roasted and toasted. Roasted and toasted.
I appreciate you all, but I feel like students can make decisions in a quicker way and have more
I don't
productive
doubt-
conversations
I don't doubt
sometimes.
that to be the case.
Just saying.
I
Just
don't
throwing
doubt.
that out there.
I do
And-
not doubt that. Although
And I would call out that we have Tay and Parker in the back who are on our DSC. And did I
Tay
see
and
another?
Parker and Jackson.
Jackson
We're
as
all
well.
here.
All right.
So thank you all for being
you
here
for being
tonight.
here. I did just want to add one governance note. This passing the template for the superintendent's evaluation is kind of the capstone of this long series of really important governance and strategic planning work that started with our visioning process, our community-led visioning process in the summer. The visioning process that then really informed our board goals, and then the board goals which are very explicitly expressed in the superintendent's evaluation. So it feels rather tidy to be settling all of those by the end of the year, and it feels good to be moving forward with some pretty clear expectations and standards. And thanks everybody for all the thoughtful work on that.
I just got to say two appreciations. One is back in 2000, I worked on a district strategic plan, and I specifically wrote language about a basically customer service feedback system for the central office. How are we doing in serving schools? And 19 years later, I'm hearing we're going to get it. And as important as that is, I mean, this is I mean, dog years, right? Also appreciating that, however important that is, you bring it right back to how are we doing with our neediest students.
Thank you. Superintendent, with your blessing, given the late hour, I'm going to move to our public and student comment before your report. Ms. Bradshaw, do we have any student comment?
No.
Okay, do we have any public comment?
Yes. We have Lisa Lyon and Angela Uberblau.
Urbalau.
There we go.
Welcome.
Hi. Good evening, Chair Guerrero and members of the board. My name is Lisa Lyon, Lyon. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you tonight as the parent of a dyslexic 10th grader at Grant and as a founding member of Decoding Dyslexia Oregon. Fortunately, many positive things have happened since I first addressed the board regarding dyslexia more than 5 years ago. Recently, PPS has provided training to 20 reading specialists in the Orton-Gillingham approach, sent 40 educators to the International Dyslexia Association Conference and to the statewide teacher in-service on dyslexia at the University of Portland. They have also hosted a community-wide dyslexia listening session, and they also have appointed a program administrator for dyslexia. While this commitment is to be recognized and applauded, I want to focus on the curricula that is under current consideration to be added to the existing equity-based balanced literacy instructional framework. But before focusing on this current proposal, we must look back to the last adoption, 4 years and approximately $9.5 million ago. Alarms were sounded expressing dismay and fear that selected curricula which formed the EBBL framework were insufficient. Materials were purchased from the 5 unique vendors, although there was no evidence to show these curricula would coordinate to form a comprehensive literacy curriculum. Finally, 4 years later, after review of these offerings, PPS has courageously admitted that there is a gap in instructional materials. In the previous adoption, the curricula did not include content to address 2 of the big 5 ideas in reading instruction, as outlined by the National Reading Panel: phonemic awareness and phonics, the 2 most fundamental reading skills upon which reading success is built. I am grateful that PPS has recognized this gap and is acting to fix it. However, what will be different this time? Can you ensure us that the Foundational Skills Resource Committee, currently tasked with examining curricula, is made up primarily of experts in how to teach reading? Are they already knowledgeable in the science of reading, including phonemes, morphemes, and syllable types? Is the committee racially diverse? This matters. We all know that PPS has not done nearly enough to support our students of color who are struggling with reading, and our outcomes reflect that. During these past 4 years, how many of our K-3 children have missed out on the most fundamental instruction in reading because of poor decisions that were made 4 years ago? Too many. A guesstimate is 4,000. My question is, what will prevent PPS from adopting another inferior curriculum? I have been told that teachers will be piloting programs, but there will not be any data collection. Although I have heard that all 5 curricular candidates are solid choices, according to Ed Reports, an independent nonprofit that reviews instructional materials, there is a clear winner among the 5 candidates. Ed Reports shows that the American Reading Company program meets expectations in every category. Other programs under review only partially meet expectations. I urge committee members to diligently review these materials to prevent another instructional mistake. PPS educators, children, and families deserve to have nothing left to chance regarding reading instruction. Give educators the best tools so they may provide better reading instruction to their students. The selection of essential materials should be guided by data and not by popularity. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for the chance to speak with you tonight. My name is Angela Uerbelau, and I'm the mom of 2 girls at Irvington Elementary School. And along with Lisa and several other advocates, I'm a co-creator of OregonKidsRead.com. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about the petition, but before I do that, I want to take a minute to acknowledge all of the PPS students. I just want to thank you for your hard work every day. I want to, I'm looking at you because you're the student representative. We see you, we see your hard work, we appreciate you, and we're proud of you. As I said 3 weeks ago, I and other literacy and racial equity advocates launched the Oregon Kids Read petition. And we did this because Oregon is failing our students, and in particular, failing our students of color when it comes to reading. Almost half, and I know many of you already know this, but almost half of our Oregon students are not meeting reading benchmarks. 72% of our Latinx third graders are not reading at grade level. 74% of our African American and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander third graders, bless you, they're not reading at grade level. And as we've talked about tonight, the numbers in PPS are similarly appalling. And behind every number is a child that we care about. And all of us in this room, every single one of us wouldn't be here if we didn't care about those children. And also, I want to be very, very clear to any student who is listening. This is not your fault. This is not your failure. This is an adult failure, and these are problems that adults have created. And we need to do more about this, and we will. The Oregon Kids petition, Oregon Kids Read petition is part of that. We are calling on the Oregon legislature to dedicate 2% of Student Success Act monies, and that's of the statewide initiative monies, not of the district monies. We're asking them to dedicate 2% of those monies towards reading instruction, offering it to all of our K-3 teachers and our reading specialists. Already, 2,700 people have signed the petition, including your former board colleague, Dr. Julia Esparza Brown, and Mercedes Munez, who's the Oregon Teacher of the Year for 2020. We're doing this, we've signed it because we're inspired and we're motivated by Mississippi. They have adopted a comprehensive literacy program, and since 2013, they've trained 13,000 of their teachers in the science of reading. And this year, their fourth graders were the only fourth graders in the country who improved on nationwide reading scores. Mississippi, the poorest state in the country, with the most richly, racially diverse student population, they're showing us what we can do here in Oregon and what we can give to our kids. So I'm here to ask you, because science, I know I'm almost done, science proves that almost any child can learn how to read if she or he or they are given the tools. So I'm asking you as a board to consider signing the petition, and I know some of you already have, and we're very grateful for that, and some of you are just learning about this. So please take a look at it. We welcome your support, and we really appreciate you, and thank you for everything you do for students. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Rebecca Hannison and Carrie Archer.
Hi, my name is Rebecca Hannafin. I'm a member of the PPS Dyslexia Advocacy Group. We want to thank PPS for hiring Elizabeth Martin to serve as the district's point person for dyslexia. She's been a fabulous collaborative partner. Our group strongly supports the PPS 5-year dyslexia priority plan, and we urge you to fully fund it. And then we urge you to dig deep and commit to solving the district's literacy crisis. My 5th grade son is among the 81% of African American students at PPS who are not reading at grade level. This is a full-fledged civil rights crisis happening on our watch. I'm a lawyer, so my kids started out at one of Portland's good schools. I wish I had time to tell you how awful it was. My son struggled in kindergarten, and when I asked for testing, the buildings team dragged their feet. Then they misread their own test results and refused to give him services. After $3,000 in private testing and a year-long fight, in 2nd grade, my son finally got his IEP. I drafted most of his accommodations myself because the special ed teacher wasn't trained to identify or help dyslexic kids. The classroom teachers weren't trained to teach struggling readers. There was no assistive technology at the school, and when it finally arrived, no one knew how to use it. My son would never have learned anything at this good school if we couldn't afford years of outside tutoring. We also paid therapists to help manage his emotional stress. And don't get me started on the racial microaggressions and culture of low expectations that were an everyday part of our black child's life in affluent Portland. Thanks to the boundary change, we're at a less rich but much healthier school. Rose City Park Elementary is amazing. They've committed to real equity with resources directed first to marginalized students. The instructional specialists and special ed teachers are trained to support struggling readers. Accommodations are normalized, classrooms are flooded with interventions that benefit all students. My son is happy. Last week, my 5th grader was able to fluently read a brief 5th grade passage. It's magic. But next year is middle school. The Dyslexia Priority Plan includes training for K-2 teachers and reading specialists, but little support for middle and high school students who need one-to-one instruction or who struggle to complete the world language requirement for graduation. Roseway Heights, where we're going, is on the list of middle schools needing targeted improvement at PPS, and thinking of the battles ahead is exhausting. I'm a white lady with a law degree. Imagine the hurdles faced by less privileged families. We must identify students who need one-to-one instruction as early as possible using simple assessments without having to wait for special ed identification. We need Orton Gillingham or structured literacy trained teachers, reading specialists, special ed teachers, and instructional specialists in every school, including middle and high schools. We need strong, specific Tier 2 and Tier 3 instructional plans at the middle and high school level based on each student's individual needs. We must fund and implement equitable access to assistive technology. We need to offer ASL at all high schools, not just the ones on the west side. We need consistent curricula and instructional practices that are scientifically proven. We strongly recommend that the district form a cross-departmental literacy task force, perhaps building on the existing dyslexia working group. Literacy is a prerequisite to all other formal education, and we believe it's a civil right. Our group is eager to be a resource for Elizabeth Martin and other district staff in this work. Please let us be a resource for you as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Really happy to hear about your son's success.
Hello, I'm Carrie Archer, and I teach kindergarten at Arleta K-8. I have taught kindergarten and pre-K for over 20 years. I have a reading endorsement, and I'm a dyslexia advisor at Arleta. Through my training as the dyslexia advisor, I became more aware of the necessity of explicit and systematic literacy instruction. That compounded with the fact that I had a student last year who, despite one-on-one support from me, the kinder EA, and our reading specialist every day, did not make any gains in his literacy skills. This prompted me to pursue training in the Orton Gillingham approach. I felt that I needed these skills in my toolbox as a kindergarten teacher to be fully successful at my job. I'm now a part of the PPS Orton Gillingham cohort, and my student from last year is my practicum student. And he's finally making growth, and I'm sorry, it's emotional. I definitely think Orton Gillingham and other structured literacy approaches are necessary for struggling students and those with dyslexia. However, these approaches should not be limited to struggling students. All students deserve to have clear and complete understanding of the English language. I have been using the Orton Gillingham approach with my classroom of my kindergartners, and I have been amazed at how much my kindergartners soak up about our language and then apply it in their reading and writing. I have been teaching them about syllables, phonemes, suffixes, and morphemes. At parent-teacher conferences, I had parents tell me things about their kindergartners that they had been teaching them about our language. They told me they were amazed. For example, I taught my kindergartners the suffix ed, and that means the morpheme for that is it means in the past, and then we hear it 3 different ways, and they've now been applying that in their writing. Just today, one of my students was writing a word, and she said, "Is this t at the end? Is that ed?" I mean, it's amazing the things that if we teach our children what our language is all about, the amazing things that they can do with it, and how it will help them grow so much. I just feel so strongly that we must provide quality, systematic, structured literacy to all students. Yes, struggling students, yes, dyslexic students, but all students across the board. And we also need to provide the education to our educators as well. I have my reading endorsement, my master's, and I was never taught about structured literacy in my college experience, from Pepperdine University all the way to Lewis and Clark. And that's just not acceptable. So we need to teach our educators so that they can teach our children. Thank you.
That's all.
Further public comment? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. All right. I don't think, who are you seeing? Oh, when we're there on the agenda item. Yeah. Student representative.
Yes, that's me, apparently. Hi.
Hi.
It's been a long day. It feels like it should be Friday, but it's only Tuesday. At least break is next week. We're almost there, people. Okay, cool things going on. SRO State of the Union is tomorrow. Get excited. It's 4:30 at the Left Bank Annex, which is like 2 blocks away from here. Shanice Clark and a lot of students, both within our district and outside of our district, have been doing, and community members have been doing a lot of work to make this event happen. It's going to be a really great afternoon, evening with lots of learning. I believe some board members are going to be there. Yes, I see nodding. Awesome. Great. See you all there. We're going to be doing we're going to have a lot of discussion about SRO safety and the student benefit agreement. And there's going to be a great student panel with students who went through our education system and also students who are just very educated in this topic. In DSC news, we had our retreat on Saturday, which was really productive. We did a lot of community building, which is really nice to see from the beginning of the year, kind of having some fun times, which I enjoy, even though, you know, it is work. It still should be fun, and there's a lot of great people that I get to hang out with and work with. We did some sticky note goal activities, which was good. I know everyone is familiar with that. And coming out of that, we kind of decided on our goals today, which are going to be centered around equity and curriculum and arts and being culturally inclusive in our curriculum. We're going to be having an ongoing conversation about safe and modern schools, especially with representatives from Jefferson on the DSC. We've realized how important communication across schools is throughout, you know, all of us building relationships with each other on the DSC and realizing, you know, not all students have this, and so doing more of that. And then focusing on climate justice. We've all noticed a lot of, you know, recycling doesn't happen even though we have access to recycling bins in our school. Also, we had 2 student members who, I don't know, I didn't comment on it because I just didn't, in the business agenda, who are now officially on the CBRC, which is exciting. So I'm starting to infiltrate the board committees with students. Get ready, all of you. It's going to be a fun time. We have lots of students who are interested.
Waiting for the audit committee.
Yeah, we have people interested. Get ready. I'm coming in. We're doing it. Who are going to join some board committees. I told Andrew I already have someone interested in the bond committee. It's going to be great. Policy committee, get ready. We've got lots of students who are interested, so it's going to be really awesome to start putting student voice at the center of all of these decisions, like I so strongly believe. I'm getting better at this, which is good. Also,
It was an A+.
I think I'm just really tired and like I've given up on being nervous, so that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Superintendent, would you like to give your report?
Thank you for that early birthday present with my evaluation. Good evening. I anticipating an ambitious agenda, kept it very brief. There's a student trombonist there. If I know our board members are getting out there, but certainly want to encourage our community to get out. Almost all of our schools have some wonderful winter showcases, concerts, including moving into January, and we try to post all those performances. So definitely encourage folks to check out our talented students. Just a few photos. This one might look familiar. This past Saturday, we celebrated a major milestone. I want to thank the board for being a part of the groundbreaking at Lincoln High School, where work will soon begin on modernizing the Lincoln campus. Chair Constam and I had the honor of sharing a few words with Lincoln community members who braved this gray Saturday morning to show their support. Principal Chapman and her team were wonderful hosts at the school, where we were also joined by a number of elected officials, including Congressman Blumenauer and Mayor Wheeler, along with Fire Chief Boone, Lincoln students, and other alumni. And Commissioner Sharon Meyer was also present. Thank you, Lincoln Band and Choir, and the Turquoise Pride drummers who were also present. There were many voices at the podium, but the message was consistent throughout. Every one of our students in Portland deserves a safe and modern learning environment. So we will need to rely on the continued support of our Portland voters for many years to come to better ensure that every educator and student in PPS has access to an optimal teaching and learning environment that is going to support our vision to reimagine Portland public education in Portland. As we proceed through tonight's agenda, you're going to hear very briefly. I don't know that you'll have a discussion, but want to make sure and blow our trombone on this one. A clean, no findings, comprehensive annual financial report. I don't take that for granted. And you're going to hear some more on our continued dyslexia work, an area that we're committed to, where I think you can only expect some continued focus, attention. And then really just a parting message. Want to wish everyone a safe and warm winter break. Our educators and students have certainly earned a bit of time off to recharge and reconnect with family and friends. Just a few more days, our student delegate. And as we find ourselves in this, in the midst of this season of giving, I want to thank all of our community who helped make this season and all year round the best it can be for our students. So just wanted to leave you with a short video by one of these efforts by our local Portland firefighters.
So this morning we have Portland firefighters, Union 43, coming today to donate 250 coats to the Head Start program.
Hi, I'm Terry.
Hi.
What's your name?
Mateo.
Mateo, you want to go get a coat? Yeah. All right, let's go get a coat. Let's go look over here. Oh yeah, what color do you want, Mateo? All right, let's try it on. Now, it's gonna be really big, so it's gonna fit you for a long time, okay? What do you think? Oh, look at that. Is it warm? Wow. It's a great day for not only what you get for giving to the kids, but what you see in their eyes and knowing that they get to take something home that's extra special and will last a long time.
It is a huge help for families with the need that we have in this community.
And this just enables families to spend money on food and rent and not worry about getting their kids a warm coat.
And they cannot believe that they actually get to take home their coats. A lot of these kids have never had a coat of their own, or they have to share a coat. So that's why we put their name in it and they take it home.
What are you doing? What are you gonna get?
A coat.
Portland firefighters have been giving out coats for over 8 years, or for 8 years, and we've given out more than 2,000 coats. And we plan on increasing that every year.
So let's see, what colors do you like? Para las familias que no están ahorita aquí recibiendo abrigos, siempre nosotros encontramos una manera para poder ayudarlos si necesitan un abrigo y pueden venir a hablar con nosotros si necesitan en el servicio de familias aquí en Sacagawea Head Start.
We're gonna go outside, and when we get outside, we're gonna do our choo-choo train.
I think the biggest message is there's people out there that care. And even though some folks are struggling and can't afford those coats, that we are here to help.
Thank you to our local Portland firefighters and the broader community for caring, for always stepping up for our children and youth, particularly at this time of the year. And I think directors heard a little bit of a preview from me earlier in the previous discussion, but we have an ambitious agenda for the coming new year. And I expect us to have a productive second half of this school year. Thank you.
That was great. Also, a shout out to our PPS employees because we had a great clothes drive here in this office to support our PPS clothing center at Marshall High School. So I saw a lot of those bins full with a lot of new coats and cozy warm things. So thanks everybody. Deputy Superintendent Hertz, the next item on the agenda is the CAFR. Would you like to introduce that? She asked. What? Oh, I'm sorry. I just was. Can I just do it? Yes, do it. Go for it. I'm sorry.
So while you're moving into place, thank you. So on December 5th, the audit committee, which includes directors Scott and Pass and 2 community members, we had a presentation of the comprehensive annual financial report, and it was presented by the district's financial auditors, Talbot, Corvola, and Warwick. And just to summarize, and we'll hear it here in a moment, but that they've issued an unmodified opinion of our financial reports for the year end June 30th, 2019. And that is a technical term for a clean audit, and it's the highest level of opinion. I think I want to, before you all go, just, I'm sorry that our CFO is not here tonight to hear us say what an excellent job the team did this year to get a clean audit. If you read through the whole thing, which the audit committee members get to do, so you can sell that as a sales point. But I want to thank the CFO, the whole financial team, and the deputy superintendent for business and operations for the work they did this year that resulted in this unmodified opinion and really putting us in excellent standing going into the next fiscal year. So with that,
Thank
you can count on having this under leadership standard number 7, sound financial resource management. Deputy Hertz.
First of all, I'd like to, did you have a comment?
No, I just wanted to wish everyone a happy break. I'm going to go home and do some homework. And
Yay. Good night, Max.
I'll
Happy
see you
holidays,
all in a
Maxine.
couple weeks. Yes, happy holidays, everyone.
Happy holidays.
See you tomorrow.
The fun never stops.
Okay, so it's my pleasure to introduce our external auditors here. Tim Gillette is here joining us, and his, was our audit partner for the last, several months. And our director of finance, Tracy Pinder, who's really the one that does the work if you really want to know about the CAFR. So her favorite thing is to come and do public speaking in front of the board. And so she just is smiling and sitting up front with me, and I appreciate her being here with us, just so she knows how much we appreciate the work she's done. But at this point, I think you got the headline from our superintendent. I couldn't be more pleased with the progress our team has made, our financial team in this district, in terms of where we were a couple of years ago. And having consistency, we have sound financial leadership that continues, has been here for more than a year, continued on to a second year. That's turning a corner for us, and I'm very pleased at who we have on board. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tim to just highlight a couple of things for us.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Claire. Tracy loves public speaking so much, of course, she pushed the microphone over towards me. I'm Tim Gillette, partner with Talbot, Corvola, and Warwick, your external independent auditors. As Claire mentioned, I did meet with the audit committee a week or two ago and had a chance to go through the audit report in as much detail as they could stand. But they asked me to go through each and every page of the 200 pages of your CAFR one at a time, kind of in keeping with the meeting so far tonight. And okay, I'm kidding about that, But Superintendent and Counselor Brim Edwards have already kind of stolen my thunder because the headline is, "It is a clean audit report and unmodified opinion, the best thing you can get from your auditor." So that's the report on the financial statements, that they fairly present the position of the district. There are a couple of other reports included in here, a report to the state of Oregon on Oregon minimum standards, and there's also a single audit. The single audit report is the one the federal government requires you to have because you expend over a certain level of federal grant dollars, and that's the one where not that many years ago there were a number of findings, and this year there are no findings, so that's a wonderful thing, and a tribute to Claire and Cynthia, who's not here, and Tracy and Cheryl and the rest of the accounting and finance team doing good work again. So thanks very much for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has.
I should note that the committee recommends that the full board accept the audit. It was done so well.
This evening?
Yes, that's,
Motion to break. Yep.
Second. Was that a motion?
it wasn't a motion, I was just noting, because I forgot to say it earlier, but that was the action of the committee to recommend that the board accept the.
So moved.
Got it.
Second? All right, do we have, Director Moore, some discussion on our clean audit?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't, I'm going to be brief. No, I just wanted to thank the auditor for the presentation. I was at the audit committee earlier. My background is in public finance, and I spent a number of years as a budget director for a city, and even though I'm not a CPA, I've spent a lot of time with CAFRs. And this is truly it's a really good result. And I think that sometimes it gets lost a little bit in the larger narrative around just governments in general, local governments in general, particularly school districts. But we manage our resources really well. We follow all the rules. We apply all the GASB standards. And that's something that we should really be proud of. So congratulations to Deputy Superintendent Hertz and her team, and thank you for your work.
Go ahead.
Just a couple. Okay, now I'm a little nervous. So thank you to everybody, and I think it was relatively recently that the CAFR was not clean, and we've now had 2 years in a row with a brand new finance team, and I think it shows. So I want to. I'm repeating what everybody else has said, but thank you for all the work. I know there was a lot of. It's taken quite a lot of very concerted effort to address the issues that were present in the past, and I think another clean audit is a testament to all the effort that's gone into it. I wanted to ask a couple of things that are actually not specific to the CAFR. I wanted to ask a couple of things about the revenue. This is on page 23 of the report. And these are probably less questions and more me making a point. So under revenues, we have we have a chart, and we have a bar chart and a pie chart. And the bar chart, I just want to make sure I'm getting this right. So in between 2018 and 2019, the state school fund, the revenue we got from the state school fund, actually decreased by $14.3 million. I think that's worth noting. And am I correct in assuming that that is because the state did not actually apply the appropriate, now I've lost the terminology, maintenance of effort? It's not the right term, but.
Are you thinking of the quality education model
No.
and the funding level? No.
No, it's the current service level.
Current service
That, that they used a formula to determine the current service level that actually did not reflect comprehensive and actual costs to districts.
Historically, that has been true, that it usually our current service level roll-ups do not keep up with all of the revenues at the state
Right,
level.
and that was the
That's
case
correct.
for 2019, right?
Yeah.
But I think also
So-
that number there is a reflection of our changing student demographics, right?
Well, it's all, there's many factors, but there's also, because we're paid on the number and types of students that we have, and our property tax collections have gone up as well, that does mean that we receive a total state school fund based on those two items added together.
Right.
Yeah, so it may be more the state equity model, because you have to look at the orange, the orange minus the local option plus the gray is what we get from the state, basically. And if our education property taxes are going up substantially more than the state average, then the backfill from the income tax for us will be proportionately less. So,
Which means that there's a net outflow of money from the metropolitan, from this district and the metropolitan area
and
to
it's
the state.
probably gotten bigger.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just making a point here. And that in the pie charts, the property and local option taxes makes up 56% of our revenues, as compared to 26% from the state school fund. So thank you, voters, for passing the local option levy. There's a reason why we were so anxious, because this is a very big item for the PPS budget. And then I had an actual question. On page 27, it's looking ahead to next year. And it mentions the possibility of a kicker. And I believe the kicker is going to kick. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, what impact, can you speculate what kind of impact that's going to have on the PPS revenue and the state school fund in general?
So the kicker doesn't change the amount from the state school fund. What it does is it's returning money that was collected above and beyond what was originally appropriated at the state level, the original budget for the state.
Right.
So what it does is in our state, because we rely on fewer types of taxes, when we have an upturn in the economy, we end up giving money back. When we have a downturn in the economy, we end up not having enough because we don't have all the types of taxes that many other states have. And so that then we can have a boom and bust in terms of how we support our schools. It's not, so the kicker adds to that component. So overall, it's important to note that when times are good, we're giving resources back, which is in our Constitution to do that. And however, when we have a future recession, which the state tends to have, we don't always have the resources we need to continue on with K-12 education.
Right.
So it's not probably the healthiest way of operating financially.
Which is why the board, in its infinite wisdom, a few years ago, passed a resolution around the contingencies, around the reserves. So So we now have, I think 6.4% of our budget is now in reserves. And we have pledged to have a reserve level between 5 and 10%, moving toward 10% in order to provide us with sufficient funds to maintain some level of stability even in the event of the inevitable economic downturn and recession.
So we have targeted 2025 to be at 10%. That is our current goal in working between now and then to get there.
Hoping that we don't get a recession in between. But anyway.
That's correct.
Okay.
Starting next year, for the first time, we'll have somewhat of a third leg to the stool.
With our Student Success Act dollars.
It's a start.
Any further
Or
comment?
down payment, as you would say.
It's going to be a small leg, but I'll take it.
Any further comments or questions about the comprehensive annual financial report? I'll just chime in that it is remarkable for an organization of this complexity to have a clean report, even if the vast majority of the functions of the House are in order. There are often a few loose ends, and to have a completely clean audit like that is great. So thank you again for your diligence in pulling all this together. It's a delight to have a high-functioning finance team. And the board will now consider Resolution 6019, acceptance of the comprehensive annual financial report. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Any abstentions? The resolution passes by a vote of 7-0 with Student Representative Lateral absent.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right. We will now move on to item number 7, the amendment to the Roosevelt Phase 4 plan. Superintendent Guerrero, would you like to introduce this item? Thanks.
I don't want to rob the opportunity of our Chief Operating Officer to come down here and introduce the star-studded panel to speak to this topic. Thank you for the very many of you who've remained engaged on this important plan. Mr. Dan Young.
Thank you. Good evening, directors and superintendent. In your packets tonight, you have a staff report and staff recommendation and a resolution on the item of the Roosevelt Phase 4. And with me tonight, I have Roosevelt Principal Katie Parman, Dr. Aurora Heimel, and OSM Director Marina Cresswell. They're going to come up here and they're going to give a brief presentation about the materials that are in your packet, and we are here to answer any questions that you may have. So if I may, I will invite everyone down.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, directors. My name is Aurora Heimel, and I am the Senior Director of College and Career Readiness. And I'm going to start the presentation just with a little explanation of why we're here tonight and what we're going to be talking about. And so, as most of you know, Roosevelt High School under the 2012 bond was rebuilt. And in 2016, a resolution was made, 5242, to add an additional 10,000 square foot to the building. The original resolution cited that the bottom floor would be made up of manufacturing CTE, aviation CTE, and that the second floor would be a district-wide makerspace hub. And that movement to complete that resolution was put on hold in 2018 when there was a large turnover in central office, and also as a pause as we went through the visioning process, made sure we had a college and career readiness CTE plan in action as our STEM team also came together. And so the next step in the process is that we, as a district, came to the Roosevelt community to hear from the community if those items that were written into the original resolution were still viable and wanted by the community, because as we know, programming and situations change in schools over time. And so what we found was that there was desire from the community to keep the spirit of the resolution, which is to add additional hands-on opportunities for students to have rigorous STEM opportunities and project-based learning setting, but through a different lens. So I'm going to let Principal Parman talk a little bit about the current needs and desires of the school and the community, which will give some background to the proposal that we'll be making this evening.
Hi, thanks. So I became principal July 1st. But I was actually a teacher at Roosevelt in 2013 through 15 when we were going through the process of what should this building look like. And so it's been really great to get back onto campus and just see the reality of the building. And in that short time, a lot has shifted and changed. So we welcome 1,200 students into our building every single day, which is great because when I was a teacher there, we were really excited to break 900. So we are growing very quickly, much quicker, I think, than district folks and I think folks in the community thought was going to happen. We also have the need for a space that's flexible with a movable wall or something, because we offer a 15 credit dual credit class through Portland State University called Senior Inquiry, and it has 50 students, 2 high school teachers, 1 to 2 PSU faculty that meet. What they'd like to do is meet as a whole group every single day, and right now we're only able to have them meet as a whole group 1 time a week because we don't have a space large enough for them to meet on a regular basis. So that's a need that was there in 2012, but we didn't really figure out a way to address it. So that's something that our students and our community are saying we need to figure out a solution for in this remodel. And then the great thing is we've built some different CTE programs, specifically construction, where we turn away 50 to 80 students every single year because we just don't have the room in the small space that we use for our construction CTE program. And so the community folks at Roosevelt are super excited to be able to offer a commercial construction CTE program, which would be the only commercial CTE construction program in the city, which would take welding and wood construction. So we could have introduction to welding classes, intro to construction classes, and then students would figure out how to put that all together so that they could walk out with some experience in commercial construction, which I don't know about y'all, but I've noticed there's a lot of commercial construction going up in Portland right now. So those are a couple of things that as a community I've heard over and over again from students, from teachers, from community members. So I'm going to turn it over to Aurora to talk more about what they decided.
So when we heard these needs of the current community, the desire to increase and improve the commercial construction program, additional classroom spaces to meet the larger enrollment needs, some flexible spaces for the senior inquiry, as well as large spaces for students to be able to do hands-on inquiry project-based learning. We brought to the community in November 2 possible options. So you'll see those in both in our staff report as well as in the beginning of this presentation, or the 2 options that we brought to the community. And then based on the feedback that we received through those community meetings in November, we did a few slight alterations to the options to come up with our recommendation that we're proposing tonight to you that we believe is a great way to meet all of the needs of the students, the staff, and the community desires for the students at Roosevelt. Marina is going to walk us through the recommendation.
Thank you. I'm actually going to start by showing you the existing floor plan and where the proposed addition would go. You can see that in your packets on page 3. But we have also outlined where the existing CTE programs are. This is helpful because we are looking to make some changes within the existing space, as well as adding the 10,000 square feet. So you can see the planned addition is on the north end there next to the theater space and some classrooms. That would be a 2-story addition. It is not attached at the 2nd story. I'm actually going to go ahead and take you directly to the staff recommendation, since you do have the scenarios that we proposed to the community in your packet already. And as Aurora noted,
Is this a test?
it is a test, yes. How quickly can you read?
How well did you read your packet?
Yes. Hopefully it's pictures and it was a quick read. Staff recommendation on the ground floor. So what I'd like to note is the proposed addition at the north end, we are looking to move the construction CTE program into that ground floor entirely. We will be moving it from a space in the existing building, and we will convert that existing building space to a new maker space that will more than double the size of the Roosevelt maker space. The existing maker space will be converted to a science lab. That is a great location for a science lab because it is in the same core area as the rest of the science labs for Roosevelt. In addition to those changes to the space, we are also looking to add an operable partition at the 2 classrooms just north of the new makerspace. That will provide us with a potential senior inquiry space. It also provides us with some options for expanding makerspace to the north. And as part of that, we'll be looking to add an interior window and door between that new makerspace and the classrooms to the north. On the upper floor of the addition, we will be putting in 4 classrooms. Between 2 of those classrooms, we'll add an operable partition there as well. Again, flexibility for potential senior inquiry space, but it also provides us some flexibility to potentially use that as a science lab if that is how Principal Parman wishes to manage her operations. That essentially summarizes the changes that we were looking to make to the space, and we are available to answer questions.
Do you have any questions?
I just want to thank you all for the hard work you've done on this and the consistent engagement with the community. And I know there's lots of different ideas and opinions out there, and I really appreciate the way you've taken that community engagement and synthesized it into a plan that will work for the existing staff and students. So thank you for all of the time and dedication that you've put into this. It's very apparent in the complexity and level of care that was in the report you included in our packet, even if we just got to flash through it, Marina.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think what you've arrived at, or what we've all arrived at, is a plan that addresses the need to add more CTE space and addresses a need for more classroom space and flexible classroom space to attend to the enrollment growth right now. So it solves our long-term and our short-term objectives, in my view.
Yeah, I want to thank you for hanging in there. I also want to thank the Roosevelt community because this has been an unfulfilled promise for quite a long time, and I know it's been a rough road, and I want to thank, and you know who you are. I want to thank the community members and the parents and the teachers and the new principal. But as you know, this has been going on for a good long time. And I really do think we would not be here today if not for the constant engagement of people making us remember that this was an unfulfilled promise. And I want to thank the staff for listening. And this seems to me to be a really elegant solution to a number of problems. It's going to provide Roosevelt students with some opportunities that they've never had. It's going to redress some major inequities in opportunities, especially for the construction program. It's going to accommodate the increased enrollment, which is a great problem to have, but we do have a fairly urgent need coming up, and I think it's elegant. You're repurposing space in a way that I think actually is much better than the original design. And I think it's a testament to the people that this administration has brought on to kind of shepherd this CTE district-wide program out. There was not a lot of, in the original design process for Roosevelt, we didn't have a lot of internal capacity to really think through the issues related to CTE. And I think it showed in the design. And now we're making some decisions that I think really are going to last for the long term. That being said, I'm just going to say out loud that it is my hope and expectation that Roosevelt will continue to grow, and this will resolve some of the looming issues of space shortages for the growing enrollment. But I think we're going to have to actually follow through on the original plan for another extension to the original remodeled building in order to bring the capacity of Roosevelt up to the 1,700 students that is the norm for all of the other high schools at this point. And it's probably going to be a little while before that can actually happen. But if we do have continued growth in that neighborhood, and I think we will, I think it's something that the board is going to have to think about as we look ahead to the next bond package, because I think the need is going to be sooner rather than later. Anyway, thank you all for all the work that went into this. I think it's a good solution. I think it's a great solution, and thank you all.
So well said, Director Moore. Thanks to the staff and the Roosevelt community for their persistence. I want to call out one more group, because 2.5 years ago when I was going to run for the board, then the person in my seat at the time, Tom Curler, said, well, if you get on the board, you better stick with that Roosevelt plan. And I know that I want to just call out that the board members realized that there was an equity issue at play and really persisted. And I think they put a stake in the ground that the community could sort of hold on to when there was a lot of different things happening at the district. When, what was happening, CTE at Roosevelt was not the most important thing or the focal point of what was happening in the district, but the community and really the board putting the stake in the ground at the time. And I can guarantee you that Tom Curler is not watching the board meeting tonight. I can guarantee you. But I just want to call out the board members at the time of doing that, and I'm sad that looks like Steve Buell may be missing one of the few meetings he's missed. He wasn't here earlier, but the board members who were on there at the time, I want to just call them out as well, and again, for the persistence of the Roosevelt community to get this. So well done, staff, of putting something together that I think matches the vision that people had.
And I want to say I appreciate that very much, Julian. Part of that board persistence was budget earmark that we never let go of in the 2012 bond budget, and this project is coming in within that scope that's been set aside. So that's also really gratifying. So good work there. And now our next step is to go out and build our partnerships with our manufacturers and our construction contractors so that we have a really great launch pad for our kids in those CTE courses in those professions. That's really exciting because we know they need the workers, and they'll be hungry for all those skilled people coming out of Roosevelt. Any other comment? Thank you, Director Moore, for, oops.
Yeah, again, thanks all the way around. I think perhaps the lingering worry is this the right layout of space to do all the things that you need to do, that our students need to do and learn as part of Makerspace STEM? I don't care what you call it, those activities. So I think it would be fruitful to have a return visit to say, yeah, here's what's actually happening in that space once it's constructed. And then we might have another conversation. Hopefully that's a thumbs up all around. Yeah, this is what we had in mind. This is working it. Yeah, I think that's my only comment.
Let's move this item. Resolution number 6018, authorizing amendment of Resolution 52.
We're just saying there's public comment, but we get to that
Yep.
after we move it.
Resolution authorizing amendment of Resolution number 5242 regarding Roosevelt Phase 4. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Director DePass moves and Director Lowry seconds. The motion to adopt Resolution 6018. I heard a chorus there. It was hard to discern. Ms. Bradshaw, is there any public comment on Resolution 6018?
Yes, we have Seamus Linsky and Donna Cohen.
So, hello, I'm Donna Cohen, and I'm here representing myself and the 6 other stalwart advocates who've been working on this for 6 years and counting. Joe Perky, Paul Anthony, David Crandall, Dennis Phillips, and Mike Verbout. And over the last couple of weeks, various configurations of us and of the deputy superintendents, Craig and Claire, and also Aurora and KD have been meeting very assiduously, and I appreciate that. A lot of time has been put into the efforts in these meetings, and a lot of dialogue. I'm sorry, I have the wrong number here for the resolution, so excuse that on the thing. So, as you know, the goal of the STEM advocates has been to provide Roosevelt with an equitable and adequate STEM workspace. And you may recall from the last time I was here that the plan I showed you actually looks somewhat similar to what you just saw. We had hoped that the vacated CTE place would become the home for the project-based STEM program, and we're moving in that direction, which is really wonderful. And this would be a space that would be a STEM course location with a certified teacher experienced in many technologies, and the approach, of course, would add to the overall school classroom capacity being used in that way. Our discussions also included ways to expand the interest in STEM courses among the student body, as well as future increases based upon an increased enrollment that we expect to see, to include, and this would be looking ahead to the future, at the point where we do have a bond that gets us another addition, at the same time to then look toward taking those two classrooms that are adjacent to the space we're talking about now and expanding the facility into that area. We expect to have a lot of conversations about program descriptions and equipment needs, teacher qualifications, space layout. Scott, I'm glad you mentioned that about the configuration. It's so important, especially if you have a long, narrow area. And for example, when the CTE construction space was developed, they didn't put in a dust collection system. Well, obviously that's an egregious oversight. So there are a lot of considerations of safety, spacing, accessibility that we would like to be part of those discussions and expand and have that be part of the bond. And at that point, I think we really can have something that would be really, that we've been hoping for. So, and just one other last thing, I put on here, there's a correction to, in the material you were given, I don't know where the bond committee got the space for Franklin, but we have the drawings and we were there last week, and so there's some corrections there in comparative space requirements. But thank you very much.
And thank you for your persistent advocacy on this.
Thank you.
Good evening, directors and Superintendent Guerrero. My name is Seamus Linsky, and I have a senior at Roosevelt, and I have a 7th grader at George Middle School, and I'm the PTA president over there at George. My wife, Scarlett Linsky, sent you an email yesterday, and I hope you read that because she's much more eloquent than I am. But she had a meeting tonight, so here I am. I've read the memo from Ms. Cresswell and Dr. Heimel regarding recommendations for Phase 4. And in it has a brief history of the decisions that led us here, and it shows you the few options they're considering, and it has their recommended plan. It leaves a lot out of the history, though, and that's what I would like to talk about. Roosevelt was built for 1350 when all the other schools have been built and are being planned for 1700. Roosevelt was also given fewer science labs and STEM space than any of the other modernized schools. And to be clear, this wasn't an oversight, this wasn't a mistake, this was a conscious decision by the board to do this. It was a vote of no confidence in Roosevelt. And the projections were there for there to be as many students as there are now, and as many as expected to be there, but the board decided to short Roosevelt. In the memo with the proposal, what I also didn't see was an acknowledgement of the inequities that got us here. And I don't see any plan for looking at the process that got us here and addressing those inequities. It's been a theme of tonight. Where is the equity lens? You talk a lot about it, but it needs to be put into action. Otherwise, these mistakes are going to happen again and again. The plan will give us a little more STEM space, and it'll increase our capacity to 1,500. But the problem is we're going to be at 1,600 in 3 years. So I don't care if we go with the original plan of STEM and CTE or Plan A or Plan B. I actually trust Principal Parman and the community's given you a lot of input as to how it should be configured. My concern is that when the project's done in nearly 2 years, we're still not going to be at a place where we need to be. This is a very short-term solution that if it were built today would solve the issues we're facing right now, but it'll immediately be out of date as soon as it's done in 2 years. So look at the medium term and the long term and make a real decision to address these things. To be clear, we do need this now, but I'm just sad. You've let these kids down. And it's the most underserved school in the entire district, and you gave them the least. So these inequities just continue. So please do better.
Thank you very much. All right. I think we've had our board discussion on this item. So the board will now vote on Resolution 6018. All in favor, please indicate by saying yes.
Yes.
Yes. All opposed, please indicate by saying no. Are there any abstentions? Seeing none, I see a raised eyebrow from Director
Well,
Bailey. I'm going to say the motion passes a
Yes,
vote of
and
7-0.
I actually had a short comment to add to the discussion, which it's important to remember that Roosevelt, which city am I in? Roosevelt common spaces were built to 1700. And that was something Director Moore had a hand in back in 2013. I'm assuming that we still.
As did you, by the way.
Yeah. That was when the district staff came back to those of us in the community and said, ooh, building high schools to 1,500 isn't going to work. We need to go to 1,700. And we said, what about Roosevelt? And they were saying, well, no, Roosevelt's fine. We said, yeah. And they wisely agreed with us. I still think there probably should have been some vetting around why is there a shortage of science lab space? I don't get. The whole process back then was really messed up in all sorts of ways. So just wanted to say that. And still today, as this district continues to work on breaking down silos in how we do things, as we're approaching another bond, we haven't worked in our enrollment projections. And I think that's really important to do as we figure out where we're going, particularly for the next bond, particularly if it's a longer bond. This is like, if we do an 8-year bond, this is our shot. We better not leave anything out or underestimate what our needs are. So we really need to bring those two pieces together in our planning process.
To be clear, though, you're excited about this positive step forward, right?
Yeah.
I have a quick question just about.
So there were. God, yes. I mean,
let's take a victory.
I can tell. Yeah, sorry. But yeah.
Director DePaz?
I just have a question about how our projections are done. If we're working with a vendor that does that forecasting, I know, but are we actually hiring them? And I'm the new girl, so I'm just asking, like, who's our vendor?
We have an ongoing relationship with the PSU Center for Demographics.
Population Research,
and they have historically been pretty accurate. Mm-hmm. So we continue to get updates from them. Yeah, and that's who we depend upon. Yeah.
Can I just? I don't think you'll hear anybody up here claim that the original process for community engagement with designing Roosevelt in 2013 was optimal. And I think we learned a lot of lessons. It's unfortunate that Roosevelt went first, so they were the guinea pig, and a lot of the lessons that we learned came at the expense of Roosevelt students in the short term. But the way subsequent design processes happened benefited enormously, I think, from the experiences of the Roosevelt DAG, Design Advisory Group, and I think the the process for working with the community and with teachers and with students in designing the high schools and other schools has continued to improve, and I expect that we'll continue to get better and better at it. Inequities happened. It is our job now to redress those inequities going forward, and make sure that the subsequent design processes are informed by equity considerations at the forefront. And I think that's what we're doing with the 2017 schools, and I expect that we'll continue to do it in the future.
One last comment, and that's that, there's a real estate component here too. So housing's being built quite readily in North Portland, or land purchasing, and so I'm not sure who the staff contact is, but it might be wise of us to be mindful of where these 300-unit buildings are going in that are in the Roosevelt cluster.
Finally, I just want to say I am really excited that we're going forward.
Yay, Director Bailey. Okay, moving on. Thank you very much. That was a long time coming. Next, we have a report to the board on dyslexia, and this was prompted really for two reasons. One was, as Chief Academic Officer Luis Valentino can refer to, there was a state mandate for training and professional development on dyslexia. And then also we wanted to hear about the district's activities because it's critical to our board goals around improved student literacy. So welcome, Dr. Valentino.
Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Guerrero, Chair, CONSTAM, directors. The team is here this evening to provide update on our efforts to address dyslexia in a comprehensive and sustainable way. And so you've already heard from some of the team members who we would definitely like to thank, that as members of the advisory have provided not only great insight, but have challenged us to think more broadly, more openly, and more comprehensively about what we're trying to do in addressing dyslexia and the precursors to dyslexia. And so on the team who will be presenting to you this evening, the second phase of this will be Dr. Tanya McKee, who is one of the newest senior directors in the Department of Humanities here at Portland Public School, and Elizabeth Martin, also new to the team, who has been working with the advisory group to prepare for this evening, but also to develop the plan of action that will take us not only through this year, but also beyond, in terms of addressing the support and guidance that our schools and our classrooms will need, the resources and supports that they will need, and being able to articulate what our accountabilities are going to be to ensure that all of our students receive the supports that they need. So I'd like to invite Dr. McKee and Elizabeth Martin. Thank you.
I guess I'm going to say good night. It's and good evening. We can go with good evening. I'm kind of a early to bed, early to rise with a 3-year-old at home, but here we are. Directors, Superintendent, thank you. Like Dr. Valentino said, really to give a shout out to the parents and the community for being here until now and supporting us through this work, the work that they've done before today, and in supporting Elizabeth Martin in her position. It's important. And I just wanted to reiterate a few things as we go into this presentation in terms of an update for the board with new board members, that this was co-constructed with the community, with the dyslexia parent advocacy group. And it's really important as we move forward that we're working alongside our parents and our community, not just with dyslexia, but really reiterating what Angela said earlier about reading being a civil right, and that all kids deserve a world-class education, and we will continue to work with our community and work with experts in the field to ensure that we are closing that gap with reading. So again, I want to say thank you, because here we sit at this time and they're here with us, and it's really important. And as this presentation was put together, Elizabeth Martin, being the program administrator for dyslexia, has worked closely with the parent group and really working to ensure that we have everybody understanding what dyslexia is and how we continue to support this within our district. So with that, okay. Oh, you were going to do the agenda. Do you want to do it? Oh, yeah. Okay. So really where we're going to, it's just a quick overview of literacy and dyslexia, just to make sure again that some of this was done previous last year, was my understanding. And looking at Senate Bill 1003, then we'll get into the dyslexia priority plan again that was constructed with the parent advocacy group. And then also we'll make mention to this as we're going through, but there was several handouts that should have been included in your board packet that we'll reference as we move forward.
Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you, Superintendent Guerrero. Thank you, directors. I have put this dyslexia priority plan in front of a lot of eyes, and so it is really great to be here to put it in front of yours. As Tanya mentioned, this was co-constructed, and I worked with our parent advocacy group as well as people all across PPS. And one of the first things we want to talk about is just giving you a little bit of background about comprehensive literacy, best instruction around teaching kids to read, which some of our comment tonight spoke to, so it might feel a little repetitive, and then going into dyslexia shortly after. So first off, comprehensive literacy, we're really looking at that same research that came out almost 20 years ago and has not changed, that all kids to learn to read need these 5 pillars. You might hear them as the big 5, you might hear them as the 5 essentials. It's phonological awareness or phonemic awareness, which is that ability to hear and manipulate the sound structure of our language. It is phonics, that is that letter sound correspondence. It is fluency, the ability to read at grade level, at a regular rate, with voice and intonation. Vocabulary, understanding the meaning of words and how to apply those words across all content areas. And comprehension. This research hasn't changed. We know this is what kids need. So in PPS, we have a comprehensive literacy system that does need to have some supplementing. We know that. We absolutely know that. And that's specific to the foundational skills. And when I talk about foundational skills tonight, you're going to see it in the priority plan. And that is really looking at all those pieces plus print concepts. Okay, that's the ability to understand the order of print, how to move from line to line. We are going to talk about spelling, grammar, and those foundational pieces come straight from our Oregon State standards, the foundational language standards, and that's what we want to ensure that all kids get explicitly taught. And when kids need intervention, it gets explicitly taught, just in a more intensive way. So this is our call to action. You heard a little bit again tonight during the testimony that we have a literacy crisis. It is not just here in Portland, it's not just here in Oregon, it is across our nation. This slide was made available at the International Dyslexia Association Conference by a researcher out of UC San Francisco, Famiko Hoft. I have to give her credit because she said, yeah, use it in your presentation. So here it is. This is pretty big. This is why we're here. This is why we need to ensure that we support our students better and we support our teachers in understanding how to teach to our students better. One thing I want to know is when readers don't reach that 3rd grade milestone, as I know you're aware, just looking at your board goals, it becomes more and more difficult to provide that intervention. And part of that is because our teachers up the grades don't necessarily have the time in their schedule, nor all the background around how to intensify and support students. That becomes then pervasive. And then it is harder for all kids who are struggling to access content across the board. High school science, high school math, all those pieces are impacted when kids are reading significantly below grade level. We're going to talk about how we address that in our priority plan. But real quick, as we move into that priority plan, I do want to talk a little bit about why we're here, which is around dyslexia. So in your handouts, you do have a definition of dyslexia from the International Dyslexia Association. And I just want to call it a couple of the big pieces from that definition is that dyslexia is neurobiological in origin, meaning that it can be heritable and it surfaces in the phonological processor of the brain. It is characterized by difficulties with accurate and fluent word recognition, as well as poor spelling and decoding. But that is unexpected when you look at the cognitive abilities of students who have dyslexia. It's also unexpected when kids have had strong instruction. So that's really something that we need to focus on here. We need to support all kids in a preventative way to prevent this, but also support our students that may just need a little bit more intensification. The other handout that you have is an FAQ that we give to parents. It goes at conference time to parents of kindergarten students in PPS, as well as new to first grade, and then it's available in our schools. And that has additional questions in case you have more questions about dyslexia. So the other piece to share with you tonight is the Senate bill. Senate Bill 1003 is the dyslexia legislation. We have a picture here of our governor signing that into law. And it impacts PPS in 3 ways. Number one, we have to have a trained advisor in every PPS building that has a kindergarten or a first grade. That training is very explicit around foundational reading, understanding and recognizing dyslexia, as well as intensification for instruction. The second part of the Senate bill is to ensure that we screen all kindergarten and all new to first grade students. The state gives us a list of screeners that are approved. DIBELS is one of them, so that is our screener, DIBELS and EDEL, which is a Spanish version of DIBELS for our 90-10 programs. The second area is notification. When a child shows risk in fall and winter on DIBELS or EDEL, we screen families and we notify them. And that is a family history checklist that gets sent home to those families. Oh, I want to point out that this is not testing for dyslexia. This is screening for potential reading difficulties. So that is a big, big difference.
Okay, so Elizabeth talked a little bit just briefly about comprehensive literacy, the legislation around dyslexia, the screening notification. A big part of putting together the dyslexia priority plan was working with different departments, not just the Office of Teaching and Learning or just humanities, and then working alongside family and communities. And so at this time, I'm going to bring up Jessica Colby, who we're limited in the number of people that can have public comment, but it was important to us and to the advocacy group to allow Jessica Colby to be a part of our presentation as it was co-constructed with the parents.
Okay, so I am Jessica Colby, as you may know, or anyway. I'm a parent of a Lincoln senior and a member of the PPS Parent Dyslexia Advocacy Group, and I'm not going anywhere, by the way. The kid is graduating, I'm not, just so you know. I want to start by thanking both Tanya and Elizabeth for bringing us into the presentation and for supporting our efforts to testify tonight and to bring me into this, as part of Dyslexia. I also want to thank you guys and Superintendent and all the work you're doing, and all the staff who have worked so hard to bring these life-changing literacy changes and supports to PPS students. We appreciate the collaborative approach PPS is committed to, and we are, in return, equally committed to this relationship and the continuing work that will be necessary to fully realize a comprehensive and equitable dyslexia support system. That PPS has a dyslexia coordinator, yay, and that she has a budget, yay, is huge. Not many schools in the nation have been willing to confront dyslexia head-on, and we hope that PPS can become a model for schools across the country to look to for their own students. The current 5-year plan is a good start. We've got a lot in there that we like. The intentionality and the commitment to students is clear, as is the effort that has gone into such a monumental task. Some of the strengths we see are the commitment to consistent and ongoing training for PPS staff, from reading specialists to para-educators to admin. Everybody's getting educated, and I love that. Expanding dyslexia supports and training for middle schools and high schools. That's a really great start. Pushing into the middle schools and high schools, I mean, the foundation is key, but there will always be kids who need the supports, and there will be kids who come in from out of district who will need those supports. Access to audiobooks and instructional support lists, it sounds really no-brainer, but it's awesome that it is actually happening. And then my very favorite thing that I was told tonight is that PPS is now going to be doing ASL, American Sign Language, online through Virtual Scholars. Yay! Thank you for letting me announce that. Absolutely. So yes, so this plan is strong, but we know that there is more that needs to be addressed, as complex as this task is, and somehow within the constraints of budget and staff, hours, and everything else, we want even more. We want more. I know, we're greedy that way. So we want all of our struggling students to have one-on-one instruction as soon as possible, at the lowest levels, at whatever level they're at, without needing a SPED designation, without having to fight for it, or without having to go out into the community to get the diagnosis and then pay for the SLP or whomever at several $1,000s by the end of whatever you're doing, because so many kids cannot do that. And while Virtual Scholars via American Sign Language via Virtual Scholars is fantastic, it can't replace direct instruction. And every high school in Portland needs American Sign Language direct instruction classes for the basic equity of giving these kids the world language that they can embrace. My kid loves it. She is, every college she's looked at has had to have ASL. So, okay. And then, yeah, the consistent and continuing budget to support all of this work. So I want to thank, again, everybody for supporting the work we do as advocates and for having me here at the podium. And I would like to thank admin and staff for being so supportive in this collaboration with when many districts would choose not to be. It is clear we are all here to stand for students. So thank you. Thank you.
Is this the next one?
So thanks, Jessica, for that. And we agree there is we're going to share the priority plan what happened last year in terms of year 0 and what we're planning for moving forward. So in year 0, having a kindergarten task force, kindergarten professional learning, foundational skill, professional learning, K-5 foundational skills, GVC, and dyslexia advisory training. So last year being the first year or the 0 plan year was the start of this work. And Elizabeth will move on to where we're at for this year.
Okay, this year. A lot has already happened. So first off, we just convened the first and second grade Foundations Task Force. These are 10 teachers across PPS that have a desire around teaching foundational skills. They've embraced the GVCs that were created 2 years ago around foundational standards and language standards. Some of them have Orton Gillingham training. Some of them are dyslexia advisors in their buildings. And they will come together and look at practices across PPS, look at those GVC documents, identify any gaps they may see, and really take those out of more of a draft phase and put it into more of an implementation phase. The other piece that they will be doing is designing professional learning for all first and second grade teachers. We have sub-slots for all 150 or so at each grade level to push them into those trainings where they learn about what does foundational skills and language skills instruction look like in the first and second grade classroom. So that 30 to 45 minute block of time, how are we teaching that code-based instruction and giving kids all those pieces we know research says they need? This follows the kindergarten that she mentioned earlier in its exact same format, and it was some of the best feedback I've ever received in PPS for training. So we're hoping it continues to be very positive for our teachers. We will be looking at the Foundations Resource Advisory Committee. I'm a member of that committee where a team of teachers and administrators are looking at some supplemental programs to support the instruction of foundational skills. And because I have dyslexia advisor training, Orton Gillingham training, was a reading specialist, I'm really excited to bring that lens to that committee work. This was mentioned earlier, but we have trained several teachers in PPS on Orton Gillingham. They are getting the associate level training. They wrapped up about 60 hours of classroom training and are now moving into a practicum where they have direct support from a trainer while they are teaching kids in this practicum. So that is going on. This year, they also have a PLC where they come together as a professional learning community to just really problem solve any things that are coming up and support each other as they are learning this new technique. I did some dyslexia overview sessions, really again to build that awareness and understanding. So I came to leadership in August and did a session. Superintendent Guerrero joined us, which was really exciting. I did another one at the educational assistant fair that we had in August, and I often go into buildings or support teachers overviewing, what is the legislation, what is dyslexia, and how can we support kids. Just last week, I was with a third grade teacher really looking at the instruction she's designed for 2 kids in her class that have dyslexia. Really exciting. We have our library TOSA working on accessibility improvements for audiobooks. We are going to pilot Overdrive in 2 of our high schools and 1 of our middle schools this year to see how that can support our students across the board, especially in middle and high school. And then a very exciting thing that is going to start in January is I gave you that FAQ. That's the one we hand out to parents. It's a 2-pager. It's a little dry. I'm going to bring a committee of parents as well as PPS folks in to really modify that and turn it into a really nice brochure for our families. And then a big exciting thing is I'm going to work with Lorraine Allen in special ed, and we really want to revise our PPS dyslexia page on our PPS site to turn it into more of a handbook. And that is just very exciting because then we'll have that cross connection between me living in humanities, more general ed, and Lorraine living in special ed. So that's this year. So going into next year and beyond. And again, this priority plan got in front of principals, central office administrators, teachers, parent advocates, as many people that would give me about 10 minutes to go through it. And so we really want to continue that professional learning for foundational skills, of course, but we really want to grow this to support 3rd through 5th grade teachers, to support 6th through 12th grade ELA teachers, English Language Arts teachers, and eventually our 6-12 all content teachers. Reading, again, is across the board. It is an access issue. If kids are reading well below grade level, how do we provide that access better? How do we train our teachers on the ways they can provide support within a classroom and scaffold so kids have that access and that continued support across their day? The other thing we really are trying to advocate as a humanities department is for additional FTE for reading specialists. We have a handful of reading specialists across PPS. I was one and was cut. And that was the second time I had been cut in only 5 years. And so that happens. We need more FTE. We need to provide people in buildings that know how to provide Tier 3 supports to kids. And related to that, I really want to develop this reading specialist cadre, which is pulling in those specialists and looking at our model. What is our model in PPS? How do we support kids who have Tier 3 needs? And let's get them more training with Orton Gillingham. So in thinking about our graduate portrait, I think it's really important for us to think about the things in this priority plan and how it connects there. So educator essentials, we really need to give our teachers as much content and knowledge as they can get to really know how to intervene and prevent reading difficulties. When thinking about the graduate portrait, we're talking about giving kids core knowledge in reading because we know how important that is. When we look at our system shifts, that's where we're really looking at advocating for more reading specialists, advocating for more training, really shifting our overall support at Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3.
And just with that last piece of the system shift is that all teachers are language teachers. Yes. And so we have to do something differently. We have to ensure that we are really pushing that with all of our teachers, that it's just not an issue in K2.
No.
And then students get to the older grades and we have teachers saying, we need some help here. So really that system shift is saying we're all language teachers, and for the district to move forward and train, but not just an initial professional development, a week-long training, but what is that ongoing coaching and support, which actually goes with our additional ask of FTE in terms of reading specialists.
Yes. Thank you. So working with our community and family, I cannot thank them enough for answering my texts on a Saturday, and just thank you again. Last year I had a chance to meet a lot of the folks behind, and actually some even before that, and we planned an evening, as you heard about earlier. Going into this year and beyond, it's really partnering across the board. So this 5-year priority plan, the handbook, the brochure, and then supporting site-based literacy advocacy groups. We have schools that are coming together and thinking about, what are the literacy practices at our schools? How can we support, from that school-based, site-based PTA level? So supporting that as well. And then I just want to end, I know it's really late. We sent 40 people to University of Portland for the statewide in-service day on October 11th to learn about dyslexia. That was a joint event with Decoding Dyslexia and University of Portland. And then thanks to our superintendent and Tanya, our humanities senior director, we sent 26 people from PPS to the annual IDA conference, International Dyslexia Association conference, which was held here in Portland. And this included teachers, it included administrators, and it included parents. So it was really exciting to have those two events back to back, October and November. And I thank you all for attending and advocating and getting people there. So
the other thing I want to add with the community event piece is that dyslexia isn't just about having an event and bringing people together. That is part of it, but it's what are we doing to support our struggling readers and our students with dyslexic-like symptoms right now? And so I want to bring that up. You know, we end with, I was thinking about that as I'm sitting here. We end with, we wanted to bring attention to the fact that we're supporting this work and it's about events. But I want to get past that it's not just events. This, you know, we do have a literacy crisis, and we are working collaboratively with our parents and our community. And again, both of us being new in our roles. And so work is happening, and that was really the purpose of tonight, was to ensure that with new school board members, that everybody is aware of the work that is happening, so that with our additional budget asks for next year, that you're aware of the work that that we're beginning and the support that we're going to need.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any board discussion?
I just want to make a comment. So this presentation really makes me feel hopeful. So I, 20 years ago, had a student who really struggled, but there wasn't any of these supports in place. And it's a very lonely journey if you're a parent without the structural supports within the schools. So this is great. I really applaud you and all the advocates, because it'll make a huge difference to our students. And there's no short journey, but having a whole community behind you makes a huge difference.
Thank you.
And I also want to say that it's really meaningful for us because it helps us see a through line to all of this governance and goal setting work that we've been doing, with a particular focus on literacy and on the appalling rates that we see now. And so to be able to have, for us as non-educators, to have a deeper understanding of the strategies, and to your point, you know, this is not dyslexia screening, this is reading. How did you refer to it exactly?
Oh, instead of evaluating, it's really screening for reading difficulties.
Yeah, screening for reading difficulties for all children. It's so meaningful because these are the strategies that are going to make a difference in accelerating growth for all of our kids. And I also especially appreciate your point about, every teacher is a reading teacher at every level, and everybody needs to have the skills. It's not just about get them there in second grade and then they're all golden for the rest of their life. So this is just really foundational work, and I'm glad we took the time to do this.
I want to echo what Director Brum-Edwards said. I have a son that has struggled also his whole academic career. He has amazing socio-emotional skills. And so I feel your pain. It's hard to be the mom that's like going to work and your kid's struggling. Also, I have a million questions, more questions than we have time tonight. So I'm wondering if I could follow up with someone. I have a million questions, like what's on the family checklist history? Why doesn't every teacher get this Orton Gillingham, I meant to pronounce that, Orton Gillingham? Training? What are who makes up the groups of kids that are dyslexic or identified as such, and who are we missing? And I've got 10 more besides behind that, that rather than going to tonight because it's so late, I would love to have a conversation just for my own edification.
Absolutely. Please, let's follow up. And
we got a whole room.
Yeah, we have a whole room of people. And to your point, you are pointing out something that's really important. So not all kids get flagged. Not all kids get identified. And sometimes it's really late. And that is why we're really trying to look at this K-12, all teachers, all subject areas, because this is what the work is. When kids have a reading difficulty, we got to do something about it, whether or not we have that identification or not. And so that's what we're trying to hit. So I am happy to meet with you, Tanya and I, our parent advocates. So let's be sure to follow up.
Well, yeah, and I'd also be curious about like the universe of care providers, like this functional neurologist that we've been seeing for years on end, and still see. So I just would love to get some answers to the questions I have offline.
And I think also that it really brings light to what Angela spoke about earlier in the testimony about Oregon Reads, and the the focus that we must have on professional development, because again, many times, it's later on, right? Students are struggling. And so we have to do a better job with our Tier 1 core instruction. But it's not just about materials. It's about making sure, and we heard that from another person tonight about testimony, about having a reading endorsement, but not having the professional development and the learning around the science of reading. And so that's not going away. We're going to continue to have that conversation. It was mentioned about Mississippi. Alabama is there. They have decided that all pre-K through 3 teachers across the state of Alabama will receive the science of reading. And so this is beginning to make to have some momentum. So really excited that you allowed us to present and allowed the community to be here because it's really important work moving forward.
Just one thing, and I can get a follow-up later, or maybe it'd be good to get the full board send something to us, but not to cover it now. But it would be good to understand how English language learners fit into this plan, and it didn't appear that it was in that plan. So if you could send something to us to share that would be helpful. Thanks.
Director Moore?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. So I'm looking at the slide. I think it's the one right before this, connecting it to the PPS vision under system shifts, and I think there's an additional system shift that PPS has needed to do, and I think we're finally starting to do it, and that is kind of using a collaborative model, not just within, among district staff, but also between the district and community members and students. And so we've had 2 items on the agenda tonight where advocacy from community members has been really critical in changing the way we do business. And it's really exciting to hear this kind of love fest. We don't hear that often. That the advocates are saying that you've been collaborative, and you're saying, back at you. This is something, the parent community in this district has always been an untapped resource. And it's just really exciting to see that we're beginning to take advantage of the resources. The other question I have is sort of in the spirit of collaboration. I'm curious about what's happening at the university level.
So are we. We're really excited about that.
I'm hoping I can get excited, but it's curious to me that teachers are not coming out of teacher education programs with these skills already.
Yes.
So what's the deal?
Yeah, I don't know what the deal is exactly. But in all transparency, the last 2 years I was assistant professor at Portland State University. And so I have reached out to several universities. I have several connections across Oregon, being part of what we call the Oregon Professional Education Administrators Association, and beginning to have these conversations, because that has come up as well, is what are we doing? And so I've already started those conversations with the dean of the Graduate School of Education, Marvin Lin, about help us out here, right? So if we're looking at training all of our teachers, what are the universities doing? I've reached out to Concordia University as well. I can just be real. Sometimes in higher ed, we don't move as fast as we would like to move. So it's additional work that we could use support on, but we have been making those initial contacts.
And isn't that part of the legislation? That there was at least an expectation, if not a requirement.
Good. An expectation is my understanding.
Yeah, and I think, and someone back there may know a little bit more, but I think some of it was a waiver, and they got some time to wait because it.
Their initial reaction was to waive out.
So
I just want to reassure the directors that myself and my neighboring superintendents have brought up the importance of foundational literacy and effective reading instruction being a core part of all of our College of Ed syllabi. And we've been meeting regularly as a collaborative with our College of Ed deans, including just this past Friday again, to talk about not just our human capital needs, which we talked about earlier, but also as we work on that, what does their program look like? Because it must include work in these areas. As someone who was a literacy specialist for a while, understand the critical need for these type of supports and understandings, but we'll continue to keep it on the forefront in our conversations with our teacher ed programs, but we've got to continue that professional learning for all of our educators here within the organization as well.
So can I make a request? So I was appointed to the Regional Educator Network that has been charged by the state with developing regional plans for professional development for educators. I would like some info from you guys about what would help, what would work, what you want me to advocate for, and the more specific, the better. So we need to talk.
This would be a great topic for the Wrens to take on.
Wouldn't it, though?
Thank you. And I'm going to apologize for the rudeness of the sunglasses, but my migraine is back, so this is going to help us cope for the rest of the night. So, yeah, I just get to pretend I'm the cool school board member.
You're not pretending.
Yeah.
You're not pretending.
All right, thank you.
I was going to say dream
Thank
on.
you again. It's incredibly beneficial for us to have a window into this depth of the work. So thank you. Director Bailey.
Yeah. Another thank you to the members of the community for schooling me over the last couple of years. Hollywood Library, Saturday afternoon. Innocently walking by, got pulled in. Yeah. So, very quickly, do we have numbers in terms of the screening from last year?
Yes.
And the demographics? Again, not now, but a follow-up, I think.
I can email them. I had them in here, but I figured
Yeah.
we were a little tight, but yes, we have those.
Please do.
Yeah. So,
And I'm also getting feedback right now about those processes to ensure that we're supporting our schools with that, because that, it was the first year. So there's always going to be hiccups in the first year, and I want to just ensure that that is as best as possible. So I've emailed dyslexia advisors, principals, as well as kindergarten teachers to get their feedback.
and that really ties in with the ELL question, especially non-Spanish speakers, in terms of a screening tool. Because
so just so you know, any 50-50 program is still screened in DIBELS. So yeah, the guidance is that you screen in the language of instruction. So
I'm sorry,
EDEL is
you
used
screen in
because
the what language?
the language of instruction. So that's why EDEL is used for our 90-10 programs, because in kindergarten, of course, 90% of the day is in Spanish. So, but I answer a lot of questions, and when a kid does come up with concerns, I always say, well, also screen. If they're learning Spanish and they're native English, then still screen in DIBELS and cross-reference both. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I would like to welcome a very patient Mike Porter from Miller, Nash, Graham, and Dunn, who is going to provide us a training on Oregon ethics laws and key issues for public officials. I'd like to apologize, Mr. Porter, for the length of our meeting thus far, and welcome. And Superintendent, would you like to? No. Here we go. Take it away, Mike Porter. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and no need to apologize. I've enjoyed it and learned a lot about a lot of the work that you're doing, and it's nice to see it live instead of YouTube. And I do have a couple of slides that I will use, and if I just, oh yeah, there we go. There they are. Well, boards like to take an opportunity like this when they're together, somewhat of a new group, to address the Oregon ethics law in particular and the obligations of public officials, public employees, public board members. And so this was an opportunity, I think, that the board looked to get a update, training, put it at top of mind. Just as a reminder, this was a referendum bill back in 1974. It had some major revisions and amendments in the late 2000s, 2007, 2009. And so our overview today, what I'm hoping to do is help you spot some of the key issues that you will see and that people are likely to see in the district, help you identify them, help you think through how you will think through when those issues arise. It's impossible in a short period to cover all the nuances of the law. There is a very good Oregon Ethics Board guide for public officials that has in depth on a lot of these topics if you want additional follow-up, and is a very good resource. I always like to start with the policy of the law. We'll get into certain components of it, but it's helpful to know what is it that the law is trying to accomplish, and the Oregon legislature provides specific statutory policy expression. It's longer than this. There are many subsections, but these two sum up some of the key components. The Legislative Assembly declares that service as a public official is a public trust, and that as one safeguard for the trust, the people require all public officials to comply with applicable provisions of this chapter of the Oregon Ethics Code. And public officials should uphold the principles described in the Oregon ethics laws, ever conscious of the public's trust. And the law is a floor, not a ceiling. And so when we see issues that maybe there's not a clear answer to, that are particularly challenging, a lot of times the advisors, we're talking through them, it is what is the law trying to accomplish here? Because if there's some ambiguity in what it is that we're looking to do or looking to accomplish, then how does it further the trust? How are we being ever conscious of the public trust? Because that is what the law is striving to address. So just as an overview topically, what we'll talk about is the law is broken up, and it can be tricky to follow when you're going straight through the statutory definitions, but it's described as the Code of Ethics, which has a significant portion that addresses use of office, and so we'll talk about that. A component of that is a rule about gifts and the acceptance of gifts and the 15 or 16 exceptions as to when is something a gift but still acceptable. We won't go through all of those, but some that we see arising more frequently. And then we will talk about conflicts of interest, which arise more often in the board context, at least in my experience, when they come up, and what it is that board members need to be thinking about with respect to acting on potential conflicts of interest or conflicts of interest. And then as we conclude, there are a couple of other Code of Ethics provisions that I'll just put out a reminder of that don't come up as often, as well as some of the, just very briefly, procedural and penalty provisions in the law, because I think it's helpful to know what is there. So, starting with the use of office rule, the general rule is that a public official, and this includes a public official's spouse, may not use or attempt to use the public official's office to obtain financial gain or avoid financial detriment. And so that can be a mouthful, but are you getting something or not having to pay for something because of the fact that you are in the position that you are in? The courts have developed a but-for test. In other words, it is because of your position that you obtained a benefit or avoided a detriment. It's a lot easier to say than it is sometimes to apply. Some of the definitions in the Oregon ethics law are important to understanding the scope of this rule and others. The rule applies to, obviously, the public officials, anyone serving as an officer, anyone who is an employee, anyone who is an agent. So it can apply to volunteers, and it's something to keep an eye out. It's not every volunteer, but volunteers who have meaningful roles on significant committees, like those committees that might be doing direct reports to the board. Volunteers can be subject to the ethics law. Relatives, the definition of relatives, we are talking about, for the most part, I'll mention an exception later where it's a little broader, spouse, parents, step-parents, child sibling, step-sibling, son-in-law, or daughter-in-law of an official. And remember, this applies to the spouse, so it keeps going, and so it's also applicable to the spouse. So you can see it has a pretty broad reach. Also reaches businesses with which the official or the relative is associated. There are a couple of key components, alternative components to that definition. So it is any director, officer, employee, or agent of any business. So no matter what line of business that you are in. And then publicly held corporations, if it's an officer or director or stock, if it's a closely held corporation of $1,000, $100,000 in a publicly held corporation, you can have a conflict of interest or be subject to the code of ethics, use of office rules if you have those interests. Actually, I'm going to start with some of the exceptions to the general rule. So remember, we're talking about using office for personal gain or avoiding financial detriment. And frequently we see this come up in is a certain situation something that implicates that rule, the use of office rule. The official compensation is one, comes up more with employees, but if a person has something that is defined official compensation in a contract that is specific, then those individuals, that is not going to be a violation of the use of office rule. The way this tends to be more of an employment issue, and maybe a tradition over the years has been that, hey, as public employees in this, in a particular, with a particular employer, we all use some benefit that we get, some credit card benefit, some miles benefit. It's just become, as a matter of practice, we consider that part of what we're paid, and entities have to look out to make sure that it is official compensation. It's something that's been designated a benefit as part of the compensation, not something that has just over the years become part of the way there is you operate. Some honorariums. So generally, public officials may not receive honorariums. So that's the first part of the rule, is generally you may not, but there are some that may be received. An honorarium is, I think, I didn't put the full definition up here, but it's a payment or something of economic value given in exchange for services which custom or propriety prevents the setting of a price. It's usually speeches or other events where you get a gift. It's not something that should be prearranged or given first. It's you gave your speech and somebody, they have something for you, and isn't this nice? It's a surprise. you knew they did it last year, but maybe they're going to do it again. That was nice. It wasn't prearranged. The custom is that it's part of the event. And that can be like a commemorative token, something that has a fair market value of $50 or less. And then there's another kind of honorarium that is not precluded by the rule, and that is an honorarium that it's really something that is separate. So you are in a particular field and you are given a gift, and it is an honorarium, and it is really related to the field, and it can't be traced back to the work as some way to influence the work that you're doing as a public official. Couple more of the common exceptions. Reimbursement of expenses. So certainly a lot of public officials have a lot of traveling obligations, and to reimburse the expenses for those traveling obligations, for example, is not a violation of the rule. You all have a policy specific to reimbursement of expenses 1.40.080 that describes how board members are to go about seeking approval, depending whether you're in-state, out-of-state, the type of travel that it is, but it is permitted by the rule. And of course, you always want to be cognizant of any policies that you have that might reflect how a rule is enforced. And then there is also the exception to the gift prohibition, and you can talk yourself in circles with the way the word gift is used and the way it's used in the statute. But basically, this is where there is a gift that is from a source that the source wouldn't reasonably know to have an interest in the work of the public official. So if you got a surprise that a stepchild went to a suite at a Blazers game by somebody who had business before the board, and there would technically potentially be a violation, but the person didn't know in the role that they were in, the relationship perhaps that they had with the individual, they wouldn't have a reason to connect it all together. Maybe it's a long-standing relationship, and there are regulations that have factors that are considered when making that. How long is the relationship? Is this something historical? Oh, they've been doing it for years, and suddenly you got elected, and now is it an issue or isn't? And so you have to stop and pause and really sit down and evaluate the rules on those. The more common examples that come up, frequent flyer miles, credit card benefits, those things that if you're generally, to be safe, not using district, or not getting personal benefits when you're doing something on district business, instead using district offices to arrange travel, that sort of thing can help avoid these types of problems. Volume discounts, I see that more in the employment context. The classic case was a motor pool person, and so they had large volume of work with Ford and then got a discount on a personal vehicle because of the large volume of work. We talked about compensation. So compensation where it is not part of the official salary, or people are calling it the official salary, but it isn't, that can be an issue. And then a tricky one, I think, is benefits that are on the same terms and conditions as somebody in the private sector would get. And so in other words, you can't say that this is something that because of your role as a public officer or public employee that you're obtaining. Example that the ethics board has is TriMet had a large volume discount with Nextel for all of its employees, and its employees were able to get additional discount. Well, that discount was available whether it was TriMet or a private company. That was the same type of discount, and so because TriMet was able to show that, that wouldn't have been a violation. But you really want to make sure it is the same benefit that a private employee or somebody in the private sector would be obtaining. Okay, I want to move on to the gift prohibition. This one you probably hear a lot about, but we'll talk about the general rule and then some of the exceptions that more frequently arise. A public official, and again, it's a public official and a spouse, may not accept, directly or indirectly, gifts or gifts worth over $50 a year in a calendar year from a single source which could have an administrative or legislative interest. That is defined an interest that is distinct from the general public in something that is being decided. So we might all have some, in a boundary situation, there might be, the general public might have an interest, but it's something that would be distinct from what everybody in the general public has. Common exceptions that we see are campaign contributions. That is an exception to the gift rule. A fortunate amendment that was made to fix a problem was relatives of members of the household may give gifts, because for a short period of time there was a question as to whether or not if you had a member of your household and you had a holiday gift exchange, that you could have violated the Oregon Ethics Code, but that was fixed. Unsolicited token or award of less than $25. So this is maybe a giveaway at a conference. You know, the less than $25 is a pretty low amount. And when you pick that something up and you go, wow, that's really nice. And you think, I could re-gift this and, you know, it'd be all right. Maybe you might be approaching thinking, what's the reasonable fair market value of this? Is it something I should really be taking? Subscription related to performance of official duties, that's actually a helpful one. It's probably more helpful for employees like teachers, for example, who are able to not violate the gift rule if they are given a subscription. Admission or food for an official or member of a household when representing a public body, and so this is going out as, you know, there's a large dinner, a community dinner, and going in your role as a public official. There's not a lot of bright lines in this. One of the things that I think about is many of the dinners I go to, they say, if you're a public official, stand up. Well, you're there. You're representing the entity when you're doing that. Continuing education discounts, so those are available for a lot of public officials. So, for example, lawyers who have continuing education, sometimes there will be a discount. Entertainment that is incidental to the main purpose of an event. Golf outing, not incidental. Optional mini golf course that is over at the side of a fundraiser, incidental. The examples the OEC uses also are things like ribbon cutting ceremonies, throwing out a pitch at a sporting event. And then there is for schools, uniquely expenses for public school employees accompanying students on an educational trip. So that comes up, although your board members, not employees, but knowing that that is there within the context of schools, something to be known. One more main topic, and that is conflicts of interest. And that guides what to do when you have a potential action or decision that could be or would be to your private pecuniary benefit or to a person or an associated business. And so there are some very limited exceptions concerning, I think, not present here where there's some requirement that you're part of a particular business to make a decision on something, or where it affects individuals, many individuals in a class in the same way. So I'll use the boundary example again. That may be something where there would be an exception. People are residents of the district, it's affecting many people. An actual conflict would result in a private pecuniary benefit. There is a declaration required. In other words, I declare I am informing and stating publicly that there is a conflict of interest. And if it is a potential conflict of interest, you may participate. That is optional. And if it is an actual conflict of interest, then you need to recuse yourself from participating. And of course, these are situations where if there's any question and you have the option, it's something that you get to decide on your own if you're a board member. But certainly the perception, if there's a potential conflict of interest, can be problematic, and so it's something to consider. The option, just because it's an option doesn't mean you should participate or.
So I have
it's up
just
to
a
you.
question
Yes,
about that.
sure.
Because I believe if you're a legislator, you're required to vote, but you have to state the conflict. And
yes.
you're saying, this is based on our policy, that if you have an actual conflict, that you shouldn't vote? Is that based on our policy, or is this general guidance?
There is a rule of necessity where, so if you have it, even if you have an actual conflict, there's a rule of necessity. So your vote is needed for a quorum, or your vote is needed to break a tie. Then there can be a vote is permitted for an actual conflict. Interestingly, you are, I'd probably want to go double check it, but not permitted to participate if you have an actual conflict of interest, but you are permitted to vote, which seems incongruous to me. But my recollection of the rule sitting here is that is what it is, and that it.
So you couldn't participate like in the debate, but that you.
Which is troubling.
But you could.
But then you would
as long
vote,
as you
even though
declared-
you have an actual conflict of interest.
I just,
Only in the case of a tie.
well, yeah, only if necessity. I think the
If it's a
legislature is
necessity.
different, under different rules for them than we would be.
Yes,
My-
legislators have different rules, but any public body does have a rule.
Yeah, my understanding would only apply, like, so some 3-person boards, it would apply, to a 7-member board, it would apply only if we needed a quorum or there was a tie. that needed to be
That's
broken.
correct.
Otherwise, you're not allowed to vote.
Otherwise, you're not allowed to vote if you have an actual conflict.
And that's in the statute.
I'd have to look and see. I believe that is in the statute, as opposed to the regulations. But it's also something I'd probably go look at myself, because I'm remembering this coming up somewhere, some time ago when we discussed it.
No, I mean, it's interesting because we have, so Director Bailey's wife is an employee of PPS, and so historically he has declared that conflict, but also voted even when it wasn't a necessity on our PAT contract. So this understanding is different than what our understanding has been before.
So when we went to OSBA training, Andrew, I think, or Director Scott, I think you were in this training with me, but they said that in the case of like the PAT contract, it's okay because it's such a large body. It's not unique to Director Bailey's spouse, but because it is if we were a tiny district of 10 people, then there could be a conflict, but because it's 2,700 teachers, it's not considered a conflict
It's like
of
the common interest, like the
Right.
boundary example. In fact, that was a nice segue into the next topic, which is the nepotism topic, which has a prohibition, but the prohibition would be not to vote on a specific employee. So you can't take action to employ, promote, discharge. And in fact, if you look at the language of the statute, it's consistent with what we were just talking about. In other words, it's an individual situation. So if we took if there was an individual promotion decision that was coming up, I think you would want to look at that. I think it's different than the PAT contract. So these are some of the other code of ethics provisions. There is, you should not be soliciting or receiving employment in return for action that you take. Hopefully that one doesn't need to be written out. And then also misuse of confidential information. And so board members are privy to a variety of confidential pieces of information, and that is for personal gain. It is not personal pecuniary gain. It is personal gain, which is a bit ambiguous, but if there is information, obviously there's confidential information, like confidential information of students that is protected by law, but also there can be confidential information of the district at various times before it's released publicly, for example, and utilizing that information that someone is privy to for their own personal purposes can be a violation of the ethics law. Very briefly on some of the procedures and penalties, there are a couple of ways that you can get information from the Oregon Ethics Board. One is you can ask for an official opinion. An official opinion takes quite a bit of time, so you would probably only want to do that on something that's either recurring or distant in the future. It does protect the public official from a penalty and a finding of liability if it is an official opinion of the board. There are staff opinions, and a staff opinion is faster, can take as little as a few weeks, and it can also reduce the penalty or the potential for a penalty to, in fact, if you follow a staff opinion, the you can only have a letter of reprimand or an educational sanction as opposed to a financial sanction. One caveat is all of these where you have a cover if you get an opinion, say, so long as the facts were represented in a way deemed accurate. So you can't be shifting away too far from the supposal that you gave to the commission. And then finally, just pointing out that the penalty, there are a variety of penalties, but the most common is $5,000. It says up to $5,000 penalty, and it can, in addition to that, if you've obtained a financial benefit, multiply or double the financial benefit. So I remember when Liz said a half hour, and I thought that is about a half hour. It gets a pretty high-level overview of the key areas that come up, and so that is the overview. You can get the guide for public officials. There's quite a bit of information on the website, and again, I always come back to, when in doubt, look back at what the policy of OEC is. If you're having, if it's something that the law doesn't answer clearly, which happens occasionally, think about what the policies of the public trust are, and that will suit you well, likely in the decision making.
Thank you very much.
You're gonna get a lot of tokens and trinkets. All right.
All right, thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
And again, thank you for your
Good night.
patience.
So it's worth noting for the board that like an annual ethics training is considered best practice. The Association of Local Government Auditors had a whole session on this just as a refresher, and so that it, especially when you have it presented to the board in a public meeting, that it sets the tone for the organization. There was a great audit that Metro did around ethics. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but it was
The one that just came out last week?
No, not last week. It was, so this conference was a while ago,
Okay.
maybe a couple months ago.
Yeah.
But it was a really interesting audit of like how the perception of employees of how the ethical standards are set in a district informally. But as part of it, their recommendation was that public bodies have annual public training.
I can't wait for next year's.
Thank you, General Counsel Large, for setting that up for us. And given the late hour, we are going to postpone our next agenda item, which is discussion of our board work plan. So board members, take a little time over the holidays and look at that document again and see if there's anything else you'd like to add or any substantive comments. Our last item of the evening will be just reports from any of our board committees or any of our school improvement bond, master planning, or design steering committee meeting. So Director Lowry, did you have a report from Cleveland?
I have 2 reports. I'm going to start with the report from the AVID National Convention, which I got to attend last week. There was a team from PPS of about 12 staff that went, some of them district level staff, some building principals, some classroom instructors. It was a really great event and talked about the ways that AVID is used to improve instruction and support students who are preparing for career and college. I attended many sessions, but the 3 I found the most helpful were on culturally responsive teaching. And I would encourage everyone to look at Patrick Briggs' online lecture. It's like 5 minutes long. It's called $2, and it's about the equity gap. And he is an incredible speaker that works with AVID. We also did a session on student voice, and I'm excited. I've already talked to Student Representative Latterell about some practical applications from that can inform our board work, and she and I will be getting together during break after the chaos of this week has passed for her to talk some more about that. And then there was a fascinating session on teacher recruitment and retention out of Clarksville, Tennessee School District, and the way that they're working with teacher trainees and teacher recruits in their classrooms and working with a local university, and just excited about the ways that other districts are finding solutions to the very things that are facing us. And then secondly, I have been part of the Cleveland High School Conceptual Master Plan process. It was really interesting. They started, I'm sure this was similar to the Wilson and Jefferson process as well, but they started with images of the school on the grounds and asked people to say what was important, what they loved, what were barriers. And then the next time we came back and rated a range of options, so things like, is it important to have counseling near administration? Is it a whole variety? And we got to do a dot exercise with that. And then multiple plans and ideas were created based off of the different feedback that was given through those earlier 2 sessions. And then we interacted with those plans, and they kind of reduced down to 4 high-level plans. So the one end of the spectrum is preserving Cleveland's historic facade with all those quotes. And then the other end of the spectrum is a complete tear down and building a 6-story sort of Lincoln-like idea. There's one that uses the parking lot that's behind Burgerville there at Cleveland, and had a sky bridge in it. But the biggest barrier for Cleveland is that the campus is not contiguous. And so how to get students to and from the field safely, and how do we deal with being the non-contiguous. So there was a lot of robust community discussion about real estate acquisition and what the needs really are, and how do we preserve student safety given the layout of the land. So it was a wonderfully led process, I think, with a lot of really great community engagement. And we're excited to see how this high-level plan kind of coalesces as we move forward with our bond process.
Dr. Moore, do you have a report from the policy committee?
We had a meeting yesterday. Okay, time flies.
Well, in about an hour and a half, it will be 2 days ago.
Yeah, true. Okay. We started talking about a revision of policy around some reimbursement around meals and gifts, some issues that were covered under this ethics presentation. And we continued talking about the 3 policies that are associated with student assignment. And we're going to be continuing with that discussion at our next meeting, which is January 6th. So stay tuned for all that. In addition to that, we had a meeting of the Legislative and Intergovernmental Task Force on December 9th, and we talked about a number of things, mostly getting sort of lay of the land about the multifaceted relationship we have with the city and different bureaus within the city, and with an eye toward identifying some areas where we could improve collaboration. And we talked about the I-5 expansion project, and the board has already weighed in several times on the wisdom or lack thereof of that project. The next meeting is scheduled for January 14th.
Yep. So we had an audit committee meeting on December 5th, and there was a presentation by SC Consulting on the 2017 bond performance audit. As people remember, we had a year one, phase one audit that was presented, that came out in April of 2017. That was primarily focused on the cost estimations and the methodology. So this was a presentation on year one, phase two, and basically providing a overview of the status of the 2012 and 2017 bonds, cost estimation, financial management. There were a number of findings and recommendations, and staff is currently in the process of implementing that. We talked a little bit about the amount of auditing that is underway. There's a lot of auditing underway in the district, and so we've had tonight, we had the CAFR, the financial audit, we had the bond performance audit, we had the Secretary of State's audit that there's going to be follow-up on, and then also the our own internal performance auditors. And we talked about really some of the good work that staff's doing as following up on recommendations that have been made to improve performance or do things in a different way. And how do we share that story with the community about the work that's underway, and matching the sort of staff reports on how they're implementing the recommendations with the audits. So we had a full discussion about that, and then we had a presentation on the comprehensive annual financial audit, which we accepted this evening. The last two things at the committee that we had a brief discussion about it, we received an update from the internal performance auditors on phase one of the contracts audit, and they are targeting, I believe, February, end of February, I think is what they said for the contracts. I think it was. She says correct. Okay. Wow. Okay. So the end of probably end of the February for that first internal performance audit, and then we had a brief discussion about the Secretary of State's audit and the district response. There's really two components of it: the management response and the board response. Staff has already created a very comprehensive reporting template or matrix that information is being dropped into, and to actually make it understandable and manageable, this huge Excel spreadsheet, make it manageable and understandable to the general public. Deputy Superintendent Hertz has created a draft scorecard that you can sort of easily go through all the recommendations and see where we are in terms of implementation. And when we get to the work plan discussion, there are some items that the board's already undertaken and completed some of the items in the audit, like the policy recommendations that, so for example, the professional conduct policy, the field trip policy, we've done that, but we have other work, and that needs to be incorporated into our upcoming document, our upcoming work plan or board meeting agendas. That's it. Anything, Director Scott or DeVos? Okay.
Two quick updates on the Wilson Master Planning. I was not able to attend the earlier committee meetings because unfortunately they scheduled them on Tuesday nights during our board meeting. But I was able to go to last week's sort of summary meeting, and sort of four takeaways that I heard from the community really strongly. One was a really strong belief in the need to invest in West Side schools. There is a overwhelming sense that in the 2012 and 2017 bonds, the West Side has voted to increase taxes. They've paid the taxes. high schools have been built in other parts of the city, and they feel very strongly that it is their turn. And it was really interesting to have that followed up by a Facebook post about the East Side feeling like they don't get enough investment. And I think what it goes to show, I'm not making a judgment either way, that every community feels a little bit left behind. And I wonder if there's not a way we can sort of change the conversation away from, are we getting ours, to more a district-wide conversation about, is the district getting and investing in what it needs to move forward? But really passionate about the need not to change the plan in terms of the overall rebuild of the high schools. 2, they want a full rebuild, not a remodel. Every other school has been fully rebuilt, which I don't think is necessarily true, but that was the sense, and so a strong belief in that. 3, keeping students in place. There's space at Wilson to do what they're doing at Lincoln, keep students in the building while they rebuild. So it was a really strong sense of they don't want students sent across town to Marshall or other options. And then finally, this was less important to, I think, the school community members, but very important to the neighborhood community, was focusing on some of the community assets such as the pool, the food carts, the farmers market, et cetera, as we do that master planning. And then segueing into the bond committee, we met on December 4th. Had a lot of conversation about Roosevelt, which we took some action on today, so that's great. And then a lot of discussion about the overall schedule. And the only thing I'll just, for those board members who were not there, we are going to need to be making a decision about the next bond in January, because that's when the district's going to need to go out for the next tranche of 2017 bond borrowing. So there's not another deadline, but I mean, that is an important deadline for us in terms of how we structure that borrowing. So you are going to be hearing and having discussions over the next few weeks as we come into that timing discussion, and the committee's meeting Thursday, December 19th, to continue that conversation.
Thank you very much.
Don't forget, there's, well, it's not exactly a task force, but on enrollment balancing, I was, and instead of having a task force, Director DePass and I are attending the staff team meetings. I was able to make the first one. Director DePass was not. Raised a lot of questions, so Claire has kindly arranged for kind of a, not orientation, but centering on where we are in the process for Friday morning. Then, as reported, I went to Lebanon today and testify to the Oregon Transportation Commission. The good news is they didn't decide not to do an environmental impact statement, but they're going to delay for a couple of months, trying to, well, I think we'll be having more dialogue with ODOT, trying to figure this whole thing out. It's going to be interesting, and thanks to Courtney Westling, who's been doing good stuff for us.
All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Then I got a briefing because I'm joining the Benson design development process, which is the stage 2 after the master plan. And that first meeting is right before the bond committee meeting on Thursday. So it'll be back to back.
I just have one last note. I'm on the steering committee for Lincoln High School, and as the superintendent noted, we had the groundbreaking ceremony this past Saturday, which was very exciting. Lincoln community is really excited. Friday I ran the last lap around the Mike Walsh Field, which was also a blast. So those design documents are at 90% completion now. So all of the subcontracting work that's coming into Hoffman is coming in, getting good interest, coming in at competitive prices, well within budget thus far. So good news and a lot of excitement on that front. So thank you to our staff out there who've stayed to this late hour. Everyone, happy holidays. We'll see you in the new year. This meeting is adjourned.